When mercy became treason, two souls found themselves caught between duty and humanity. November 1944. A war-torn French chateau. A black medic finds a Japanese nurse tied in the rain, bleeding where ropes cut into her wrists. By military law, he should walk away. By conscience, he cannot. One act of kindness ignites a manhunt. A captain demands blood. A punishment awaits. The medic who sees beyond uniform. The nurse branded traitor for saving a child. Both condemned by different sides for the same crime, showing compassion to the enemy. As they flee through frozen woods with orders to shoot on sight, what price will they pay for choosing humanity over hatred? And in a world where mercy is punished, what does it truly mean to be a traitor or a hero? Cold rain fell through the broken roof of the French chateau, turning the courtyard into a maze of puddles. Private Elijah Cole shifted his medical bag to his other shoulder and kept walking. His boots, caked with mud from the battlefield, left wet prints on the ancient stone. The thunder of artillery had stopped an hour ago. In that strange quiet, Elijah could hear everything: water dripping, wounded men moaning in makeshift hospital beds, officers shouting orders from inside the chateau. November in eastern France felt colder than any winter back home in Georgia. The wind cut through his uniform like it was made of paper instead of wool. 4 months on the front lines had taught him that war was mostly cold, wet, and waiting, punctuated by moments of terror. Saint-Dié had been beautiful once. Now its buildings stood broken, its streets filled with American soldiers and frightened civilians. This chateau, once the pride of some rich French family, served as headquarters for their battalion. Elijah walked faster, eager to deliver fresh bandages to the field hospital. As the only black medic in his unit, he worked twice as hard to prove himself. Not that it mattered to most white officers. To them, he was just another colored boy who should be digging latrines instead of saving lives. A sound stopped him, soft crying from behind a stack of sandbags in the corner of the courtyard. Elijah hesitated. He had orders to report back quickly. But that sound. He stepped around the sandbags and froze. A small woman with dark hair was tied to a wooden post. Her head hung forward, shoulders trembling. Her wrists, bound with rough rope, had bled where the ties cut into her skin. A crude wooden sign hung around her neck: Traitor. She wore the remains of what might have been a nurse's uniform, Japanese by the look of it. A prisoner then. But no prisoner deserved this. 2 MPs walked away, laughing. One turned back and shouted, "Enjoy the weather, Jap." The woman didn't look up. Elijah stood still, heart pounding. He shouldn't get involved. Black soldiers caught breaking rules faced worse punishment than white ones. Everyone knew that. But his hands, trained to heal, itched with the need to cut those cruel ropes. The woman raised her head slightly. Through strands of wet hair, dark eyes met his. They held no hope, just exhaustion and pain. Elijah looked over his shoulder. No one watched. He reached into his pocket for his medic knife, the one he used to cut bandages and sometimes uniform pieces from wounded flesh. Its edge gleamed dully in the fading light. "I'm going to help you," he whispered, stepping forward. "Don't be afraid." The rope fell away under Elijah's sharp blade. The woman stumbled forward as her hands came free, too weak to stand properly. Elijah caught her before she hit the stone ground. "Easy now," he said softly, supporting her weight. "I've got you." She weighed almost nothing in his arms. Up close, he could see bruises on her face and neck. Someone had hit her, more than once. Elijah helped her sit with her back against the sandbags, then took out his canteen. "Drink," he said, holding it to her lips. "Slow now." She drank cautiously, eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered in accented English. Her voice sounded rough, as if she hadn't used it in days. "I'm Private Cole, Medic. Elijah touched the red cross on his armband. What's your name? She hesitated. Aiko. Aiko Tanaka. Elijah nodded. Miss Tanaka, I need to check your injuries. Is anything broken? Before she could answer, heavy footsteps approached from behind. Elijah turned to see Lieutenant Harrington striding toward them, face flushed with anger. Private, what the hell do you think you're doing? Elijah stood quickly, saluting. Sir, I was checking the prisoner's medical condition. Did I ask for your medical opinion, boy? Harrington's pale face reddened further. This enemy combatant was secured here under my orders. Sir, she's injured. Regulations state that prisoners... Regulations? Harrington stepped closer, forcing Elijah back a step. You want to lecture me on regulations? I could have you court-martialed for interfering with a prisoner. Elijah swallowed his anger. I apologize, sir. I noticed she was bleeding and thought... You're not paid to think, Private. You're paid to follow orders. Harrington looked down at Aiko with disgust. This Jap was caught helping the enemy. Traitor to her own side, which makes her twice as dangerous to ours. Elijah glanced at Aiko. She stared at the ground, shoulders hunched. She'll be taken for further questioning at dawn, Harrington said. Until then, she stays secure. He shouted over his shoulder. MPs! 2 military policemen jogged over, the same ones who had been laughing earlier. Take this prisoner back to the cellar, Harrington ordered, and tie her properly this time. The larger MP grabbed Aiko's arm, yanking her to her feet. She winced but made no sound. Sir, Elijah said, at least let me bandage her wrists first. Harrington's eyes narrowed. You're dismissed, Private. Report to your station immediately. Yes, sir. Elijah had no choice but to watch as they dragged Aiko away, her bare feet stumbling on the cold stone. And Cole, Harrington called after him, stay away from enemy personnel. That's an order. Elijah stood at attention until they disappeared into the chateau. Then he picked up his medical bag and continued across the courtyard, guilt burning in his chest as the cold rain fell harder. The barracks tent sagged under the weight of the rain. Inside, 24 men from the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, all of them black, tried to find comfort on canvas cots. The single kerosene lamp cast long shadows across tired faces. Elijah sat on his cot, removing his wet boots. His socks were soaked through. He placed them carefully on the small wooden crate that served as his nightstand, hoping they might dry by morning. Mail came while you were gone, said Davis, the skinny private in the next cot. Nothing for you, though. Elijah nodded. He hadn't expected anything. His mother's last letter had taken 6 weeks to reach him, and his reply probably wouldn't reach Georgia until Christmas. Someone had turned on the radio, Armed Forces Radio Service, playing a Glenn Miller song between news reports about Allied victories. The announcer's crisp voice spoke of moral superiority and liberation of oppressed peoples. Jackson, a corporal from Alabama, snorted. Moral superiority, my ass. Try telling that to them colored boys they hung in Normandy for talking to French girls. Keep it down, whispered Washington, a staff sergeant nearing 40. You want the MPs in here? Elijah unlaced his other boot. He couldn't stop seeing Aiko's bloody wrists, her eyes empty of hope. Something eating you, Cole? Asked Washington. Elijah hesitated, then leaned forward. Saw something today. Japanese nurse tied up in the courtyard, bleeding. They had a sign on her, Traitor. The men around him grew quiet. What did you do? Asked Davis. Cut her loose. Tried to help. Lieutenant Harrington caught me. Washington cursed under his breath. You trying to get yourself shot? Messing with a Japanese prisoner? She needed medical attention. So, let their medics handle their own. Elijah shook his head. There weren't any. Just MPs laughing while she sat in the rain. Not your problem, said Jackson firmly. We got enough trouble being black in this man's army. Don't need to add Jap sympathizer to it. She's a nurse, Elijah said. Like me, she took an oath to help people. Washington sighed. Cole, you got a good heart. But good hearts get crushed out here. White officers looking for any excuse to come down hard on us. You interfere with that prisoner again, you'll be digging latrines until 1950, if you're lucky. The radio switched to a Bing Crosby song. Someone turned it up, ending the conversation. Elijah lay back on his cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. Rain drummed steadily above. All around him, men prepared for sleep, checking weapons, writing letters home, praying quietly. But sleep wouldn't come. He kept seeing Aiko being dragged away, her feet leaving small wet prints on the stone. Moving silently between the cots, he slipped out into the rainy night. The chateau cellar smelled of mold and fear. Stone steps led down from a side entrance, where a single guard dozed in his chair, rifle across his lap. Elijah had slipped past him easily. The man had been more interested in staying dry than watching for intruders. Water dripped from low ceilings as Elijah moved through dim corridors. The only light came from widely spaced bulbs hanging from frayed wires. The Americans had connected them to a generator, bringing harsh electric light to spaces that had known only candles for centuries. He heard voices ahead and pressed himself against the damp wall. 2 MPs walked past a cross corridor, complaining about the cold. Waste of time guarding a Jap nurse. Orders are orders. Besides, Rawlings wants her in one piece for tomorrow. What's so special about her anyway? Dunno. Supposedly helped some kraut kid, traitor to her own side. Their voices faded. Elijah waited until he couldn't hear footsteps, then continued down the corridor. He found her in a small room at the end of the passage. The door stood partly open. Inside, Aiko sat on a wooden chair, hands bound behind her back. A single bulb cast harsh shadows across her face. Fresh bruises darkened her cheekbone. Elijah slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Aiko's head jerked up, fear flashing across her face. When she recognized him, her eyes widened. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should you." Elijah set down his bag and knelt before her. "They hurt you again?" She looked away. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." He opened his bag and took out bandages and antiseptic. "Let me help you." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Elijah moved behind her and cut the rope binding her wrists. Then he gently cleaned the raw skin with a damp cloth. "Why would you risk this?" she asked, wincing as the antiseptic stung. "For an enemy?" "I don't see an enemy," Elijah said, carefully wrapping a clean bandage around one wrist. "I see a person who needs help." She watched him work, confusion in her eyes. The sign, it said traitor. "You want to tell me about that?" Aiko was quiet for so long that Elijah thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "We were retreating. A village in the Philippines. There was a child, a German diplomat's son. He had been shot. Everyone was leaving him." Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I stayed. 3 days hiding in a cellar, much like this one. When he could walk, I helped him reach his father's camp." "You saved his life," Elijah said. "My commanders called it treason, aiding the enemy." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The Germans would have killed me, but the boy's father gave me safe passage. Then American forces captured me." She looked up at Elijah. "Now both sides call me traitor." Elijah finished bandaging her second wrist. "Seems to me, saving a child isn't treason. It's being human." Sudden footsteps echoed in the corridor. Someone was coming. "Hide," Aiko hissed. Elijah quickly gathered his supplies and ducked behind a broken wooden cabinet in the corner. He had barely concealed himself when the door swung open. Captain Rawlings stepped into the small room, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Tall and lean, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like a schoolteacher than an intelligence officer. "Miss Tanaka," he said, pulling up a chair opposite her. "I hope you've been treated well." From his hiding place, Elijah watched Aiko's face remain carefully blank. She said nothing. "I've been reviewing your file." Rawlings opened the folder, adjusting his glasses as he read. Nursing training in Osaka. Assigned to the Imperial Japanese Army, 18th Division. Captured in the Philippines after... He looked up. Well, after an interesting series of events. He turned a page. You speak excellent English. Studied in California before the war, I see. Aiko still said nothing. Rawlings sighed, closing the folder. Miss Tanaka, I'm not here to make things difficult for you. In fact, I believe you could be quite useful to us. Useful? She finally asked. We have Japanese prisoners who need medical care. Having a trained nurse who speaks their language would be valuable. He leaned forward. Cooperate with us and I can ensure you're treated well. Elijah saw suspicion in Aiko's eyes. I've read about your incident with the German child, Rawlings continued. Some might call it treason. I call it compassion, the kind we could use. He stood up. Think about my offer. We'll talk more tomorrow. At the door, he turned back. Oh, and those ropes won't be necessary anymore. I'll inform the guards. After Rawlings left, Elijah waited several minutes before emerging from his hiding place. He seemed almost kind, he said. Aiko shook her head. He is not kind. He pretends kindness to make me trust him. Tomorrow he will ask questions about Japanese forces, medical supplies, troop movements. When I cannot answer, the kindness will vanish. You don't know that. I have seen his type before. She rubbed her bandaged wrists. Men who smile while they hurt you. Elijah checked his watch. I need to get back before they notice I'm gone. I'll try to come again at dawn. As he reached for the door, Aiko said softly, Private Cole, why are you helping me? He paused. Because it's right. And because I know what it's like when no one sees you as human. Through the partly open door, he heard Rawlings talking to someone upstairs. Clearly assisted enemy forces. We have witnesses who saw her with German officers. Rawlings' voice carried down the corridor. Lieutenant, I want her fully cooperative by tomorrow evening. Use whatever methods necessary. Elijah's stomach tightened. He looked back at Aiko, whose face showed she had heard too. I'll come back, he promised, and slipped into the corridor. The barracks tent was still dark when Elijah returned. Rain continued to fall, turning the camp into a sea of mud. His uniform was soaked through, his boots so heavy with wet earth they might have been made of lead. He had almost reached his cot when a hand grabbed his arm. Where you been, Cole? Sergeant Minter stood beside him in the darkness, voice low but sharp. In his 50s, Minter had fought in the Great War and knew every trick young soldiers thought they'd invented. Needed some air, Sarge, Elijah whispered. Air my ass. You're soaked to the skin and covered in mud. Minter pulled him toward the tent's entrance where they could talk without waking others. You went to see that Japanese nurse, didn't you? Elijah hesitated, then nodded. Minter cursed quietly. Boy, are you trying to get yourself killed or just court-martialed? They're hurting her, Sarge, planning worse tomorrow. Not your concern. She saved a child, that's why they're calling her a traitor. Elijah felt his voice rising and forced it back down. Her own people abandoned her because she wouldn't let a kid die. Minter was quiet for a long moment. In the faint light, his dark face looked carved from stone. Listen to me, Cole. I've been in this man's army 27 years, seen 2 wars. One thing never changes. Black soldiers get punished twice as hard for half the offense. I know, but... No, you don't know. Minter's hand tightened on Elijah's arm. My first deployment, France, 1918. Black private named Wilson helped a German prisoner who was being beaten by guards. Know what happened? Wilson got 10 years hard labor. Guards got reassigned. That's how it works. Elijah looked down at his mud-caked boots. So we just accept it? Look the other way? Minter sighed heavily. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you're gonna defy orders, you better do it with eyes open. Understand what you're risking. I understand, Sarge. No, I don't think you do. Minter lowered his voice further. You get caught interfering with that prisoner again, best case is dishonorable discharge. Worst case? He didn't finish the thought. Outside, a bugle sounded reveille, its notes thin in the rain-filled air. "Shift's changing," Minter said. "If you're planning something stupid, now's the time. Guards'll be tired, distracted." He released Elijah's arm. "I never had this conversation with you." "Yes, Sarge. I mean, no, Sarge." As men began stirring around them, Minter added, "Cole, whatever you do, you be careful. Army needs good medics like you, especially ones willing to see every person as human." Elijah nodded, surprised by the older man's words. Then he turned to his footlocker and took out a dry uniform. Whatever happened today, he needed to check on Aiko before the MPs moved her. Dawn painted the wet stones of the courtyard a pale gold. Elijah, medical bag in hand, hurried toward the cellar steps. He had a legitimate reason this time. Medical supplies needed inventory in all areas, including the prisoner holding area. But as he approached, he saw two MPs standing at the cellar entrance. Between them stood Aiko, her hands bound in front of her. Her face was pale in the early light, dark eyes wide with fear. Elijah slowed his pace, trying to appear casual. The MPs were talking, not paying attention to him. "Just take her outside the walls," the taller one was saying. "Rawlings wants it quiet." "What about the paperwork?" asked the other. "Right, attempted escape always works." Elijah felt cold that had nothing to do with the November air. They were planning to kill her. He stepped forward. "Morning, fellas. Need to check supplies in the holding area." Both MPs turned. The taller one, his name tag read Miller, frowned. "Area's closed, Private. We're moving the prisoner." Elijah nodded at Aiko. "She needs medical attention before transport. Lieutenant's orders." "What lieutenant?" Miller asked suspiciously. Before Elijah could answer, Lieutenant Harrington appeared from inside the chateau. "What's the delay here?" he demanded. Miller saluted. "Sir, this medic says he has orders to examine the prisoner." Harrington's cold eyes fixed on Elijah. "Medical protocol, sir. All prisoners require examination before transport." "Protocol." Harrington's mouth twisted. "You seem very concerned with this particular prisoner's welfare, Private. Perhaps you'd like to join her for questioning." "No, sir. Just doing my job, sir." "Your job is what I say it is." Harrington turned to the MPs. "Get her in the truck, now." "Yes, sir." Miller grabbed Aiko's arm roughly. Elijah watched helplessly as they marched her toward the rear of the chateau, where the vehicle bay was located. Aiko didn't look back. Harrington stepped closer to Elijah. "Private, you're on thin ice. One more incident and I'll have you up on charges. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Dismissed." Elijah walked away, mind racing. The MP's words echoed in his head. "Take her outside the walls." And Rawlings wants it quiet. They weren't taking her for questioning. They were taking her to be executed. He had minutes, maybe less. He needed a distraction, something to separate Aiko from her guards, long enough for him to what? To commit an act that could end with him facing a firing squad? Minter's words came back to him. "If you're gonna defy orders, you better do it with eyes open." His eyes were open now, wide open to the injustice, to the cruelty, to the humanity being crushed beneath the boot of war, and to what he had to do. Elijah entered the medical supply tent at a run. "We've got a problem," he told Corporal Jenkins, the supply clerk. "Sulfanilamide powder's almost out in the forward aid station. Lieutenant wants a full report on all critical shortages." Jenkins looked up from his inventory clipboard, alarmed. "How low are they?" "Critical. I need to check what we have here, then report back." "Jesus." Jenkins ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Lieutenant'll have my ass. I told him yesterday we were good for another week." "Maybe you miscounted." Elijah started pulling boxes from shelves. "Help me check everything." As Jenkins began frantically counting supplies, Elijah slipped several rolls of bandages and a bottle of antiseptic into his bag. Then he headed for the tent flap. "Where you going?" Jenkins called. "To double-check the forward station numbers. Keep counting." Outside, Elijah circled around the tents toward the vehicle bay. He needed to move fast, but running would attract attention. He kept his pace steady, medical bag swinging at his side. The vehicle bay was a muddy yard behind the chateau where trucks and jeeps were parked. As he approached, he saw the MPs loading Aiko into the back of a canvas-covered truck. Elijah ducked behind a stack of fuel drums. He needed to create a diversion, something to draw away the MPs without raising alarms. 20 yards away, a jeep sat unattended, keys dangling from the ignition. Elijah took a deep breath, then walked casually toward it, as if he had every right to be there. He climbed into the driver's seat, heart hammering against his ribs. The engine roared to life on the first try. Elijah put it in gear and drove straight toward the truck where Aiko was being held, then swerved at the last moment, smashing into a stack of empty crates. The crash wasn't loud enough to attract the entire camp, but it brought both MPs running. "What the hell?" Miller shouted. "Brake failed," Elijah said, climbing out, pretending to be shaken. "Jeep just went crazy." While the MPs examined the collision, Elijah slipped around to the back of the truck. Aiko sat inside, eyes wide with surprise when she saw him. "Don't speak," he whispered, cutting her bonds. "Follow me, quick." He helped her down from the truck. Staying low, they hurried along the chateau's rear wall. Raised voices behind them indicated the MPs had discovered their prisoner missing. "This way," Elijah urged, pulling Aiko toward a small wooden door set into the ground, an old entrance to the wine cellar, separate from the main cellar where prisoners were kept. The door creaked as he pulled it open. Dusty steps led down into darkness. Elijah went first, helping Aiko behind him, then closed the door above them. Darkness enveloped them completely. Elijah fumbled in his bag for a small flashlight he carried for examining wounds in the field. Its beam revealed a low-ceiling chamber with stone walls and a dirt floor. Broken wine barrels lay scattered in corners. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood. "They won't look here right away," Elijah said. "The main cellar connects to the chateau. This old wine storage has been abandoned." Aiko sank onto a crate, her legs seeming to give out beneath her. In the flashlight's glow, her face looked ghost-pale, her eyes huge dark pools. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? They will kill you if they find us." "They were going to kill you. I heard them talking." Aiko nodded slowly. "I suspected as much when they didn't take me to the interrogation room." Elijah set the flashlight on a barrel, its beam pointing upward to create a pool of dim light. "We need to stay quiet. Sound carries through those old stones." Above them, footsteps pounded across the courtyard. Men shouted orders. The search had begun. Aiko hugged herself, trembling. Whether from cold or fear, Elijah couldn't tell. "What happens now?" she asked. "I'm working on that part." Elijah managed a small smile. "One step at a time." A heavier set of footsteps passed directly overhead. Through the old wooden door, they heard a crisp, authoritative voice that made both of them freeze. "I want her found. Now." Captain Rawlings had arrived. Elijah extinguished the flashlight, plunging them into complete darkness. In the black void, he felt Aiko's hand find his. Her fingers were ice-cold but steady. They sat in silence, waiting for the steps to move away. Two fugitives from different worlds, united by a simple, dangerous belief that every life deserved protection, even in war, even when orders said otherwise. As the sounds above faded, Elijah squeezed Aiko's hand gently. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Noon light filtered weakly through cracks in the old wooden door above them. Dust motes danced in the thin beams that reached the wine cellar floor. Elijah had risked turning the flashlight back on, keeping its beam pointed downward. They had been hiding for hours. Sometimes footsteps passed overhead, but less frequently now. The frantic search seemed to be moving away from the chateau. "They'll be watching the roads," Elijah said quietly. "The woods, too. We'll need to wait until dark before we move." Aiko sat with her back against the stone wall, knees drawn up to her chest. The bandages on her wrists stood out white against her dirty uniform. "You have hours to change your mind," she said. "Return me to them. Say I escaped and you recaptured me. They might believe you." Elijah shook his head. You heard what they planned to do. Yes, but that is my fate, not yours. She looked at him directly. Why risk your life for someone you don't know? Elijah was quiet for a moment. Back home in Georgia, I worked at the Colored Hospital. Small place, always short on everything. Medicine, beds, doctors. But we did our best. He shifted on the wooden crate he'd been using as a seat. One night, a white woman came in, bleeding bad. Car accident. Nearest white hospital was 20 miles away. She'd die before getting there. Did you help her? Our doctor did. Saved her life. Elijah's voice grew tight. Next day, sheriff came. Arrested him for touching a white woman without permission. Beat him so bad he lost sight in one eye. Aiko's face softened with understanding. Doctor told me later, Elijah continued, he'd do it again. Said once you start seeing some people as less deserving of care than others, you stop being a healer. He looked down at his hands. That's why I became a medic. To help anyone who needs it. No exceptions. Even the enemy? Especially the enemy. War makes it easy to forget we're all human first. Elijah met her eyes. What about you? Why did you help that German child? Aiko was quiet for so long, Elijah thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I was raised in a military hospital in Osaka. My father was a doctor there. He taught me that healing knows no boundaries. She traced a pattern in the dust with her finger. When the war came, they told us American soldiers were animals, that Chinese and Filipinos were less than human, that letting enemy wounded die was patriotic. Her hands stilled. The boy I helped was 8 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes. When I found him, he was calling for his mother in German. He looked like any child. So you couldn't leave him? No. 3 days I hid him in a storage room, treating his wound, giving him my rations. When he could walk, I helped him reach German lines. She gave a small, bitter smile. My commanders discovered what I had done. They called it treason. And the Japanese army punishes traitors harshly, Elijah said. Aiko nodded. They would have executed me, but the German officer, the boy's father, intervened. He gave me safe passage through their territory. But then American forces captured me. She looked up at Elijah. Now both sides see me as a traitor. Neither wants to claim me. Neither sees me as human. I see you, Elijah said simply. Heavy footsteps suddenly crossed directly above them. Both froze as dust sifted down from the wooden door. Anything down here? A voice they recognized as Captain Rawlings. No, sir. We've searched the entire cellar complex. She must have left the grounds. Impossible. Not without help. Rawlings' voice hardened. What about that colored medic? The one Harrington reported. Can't find him either, sir. Well, that answers that question, doesn't it? The footsteps moved away. Expand the search to the village, and put out word. If she's hiding, she's resisting, and that's grounds to shoot. When silence returned, Elijah met Aiko's eyes in the dim light. No words were needed. They both understood their situation had just grown more desperate. 2 hours later, they heard more footsteps overhead, multiple sets moving with purpose. Still nothing, came Lieutenant Harrington's voice, muffled through the wooden door. Unacceptable, Rawlings replied sharply. That nurse was my responsibility. I want her brought back for final interrogation, and I want that medic found. We've got patrols searching the woods, sir. Roads are all blocked. What about the village, Saint-Dié? Under surveillance, but it's still crawling with civilians. Easy to hide there. Elijah and Aiko sat motionless in the dim cellar, barely breathing. The space around them felt smaller by the minute, the air stale and damp. Lieutenant, Rawlings' voice lowered, but still carried through the old wood. This isn't just about a prisoner escape. That Japanese nurse has information, details about medical facilities, troop movements. And if she's collaborating with one of our own men, you think the medic is a spy? Rawlings scoffed. I think he's a fool with misplaced sympathies. But either way, This makes us look incompetent. I want them found. Today. Yes, sir. The footsteps moved away, but Elijah and Iko remained silent, the weight of Rawlings' words hanging in the damp air between them. Finally, Iko whispered, "He's lying. I have no valuable information. My unit was isolated, cut off from command for weeks before I was captured." "He needs to justify hunting you," Elijah said. "Make it seem important enough to use resources. If they find us—" Iko didn't finish the sentence. "They won't." Elijah checked his watch. 3 more hours until dark. Then we move. "Where?" "Every road is watched." "West," Elijah said. "About 5 miles from here. There's a French doctor named Moreau. Runs a clinic that treats civilians and POWs under Red Cross protection. If we can reach him—" Iko's eyes widened slightly. "You thought this through?" "Had to. Moment I cut you loose, I knew there'd be no going back." She studied his face in the dim light. "You could still leave me. Make your way back to your unit. Say you were treating civilians in the village. They might believe." "Stop." Elijah's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not leaving you to die." "Why?" she asked again, searching his face. "You've known me less than a day. Your life, your future. You're risking everything." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "When I was a boy, my grandfather told me something I never forgot. He said, there are moments in life when you see who you truly are. Not who you want to be or who others say you are. Just you, facing a choice that shows your soul." He met her eyes. "This is one of those moments." Heavy footsteps crossed overhead again, and they both fell silent. The MPs moved directly above them, so close they could hear boots scraping on stone. "Check every damn corner," a voice ordered. "They couldn't have just vanished." Elijah reached out slowly and switched off the flashlight. In the sudden darkness, he felt Iko's hand find his, her fingers cold but steady. They sat in perfect stillness, barely breathing, as the searchers moved around the courtyard above. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the footsteps moved away. In the darkness, Iko whispered, "If we survive this, Private Cole, I will owe you my life." "Elijah," he whispered back. "My name is Elijah." Late afternoon brought a chill that seeped through the stone walls. Elijah had given Iko his spare blanket, a thin wool army issue, but better than nothing. She wrapped it around her shoulders, her small frame lost in its folds. Above them, the sounds of the search continued, but more distant now. Occasionally orders were shouted. Vehicles rumbled past, but no one had approached their hiding place for over an hour. Elijah rummaged in his medical bag and produced 2 biscuits wrapped in waxed paper. Not much, but better than nothing. Iko accepted one gratefully. "What will happen to your friends? The other soldiers like you?" "You mean black soldiers?" Elijah broke his biscuit in half. "They'll be questioned, probably accused of helping us." "Because of me?" "No, because that's how it works." Elijah chewed slowly, making the dry biscuit last. "In the army, just like back home, colored folks get blamed first, questioned later." Through a gap in the wooden door above, they could hear voices from the courtyard. "Gotta be those colored medics," someone was saying. "Always sticking together." "Search their barracks again." Ordered a voice they recognized as Harrington's. "Tear it apart if you have to. Someone knows something." Iko pulled the blanket tighter. "I never meant to cause more suffering." "You didn't cause anything," Elijah said firmly. "They did. Men who think some lives matter less than others." They fell silent again, listening to the rain that had started falling outside, pattering against the wooden door above them. "Will your doctor friend help us?" Iko asked after a while. "This Moreau? If we can reach him. He follows the Geneva Convention, treats everyone, regardless of uniform." Elijah hesitated. "But getting there won't be easy. 5 miles through enemy territory, in the dark, with patrols looking for us." "I can walk," Iko said, determination in her voice. "I am stronger than I look." "I know you are. You've survived this long." Elijah smiled slightly. "We leave at dusk." As the afternoon light faded, they took turns resting. Iko slept first, curled against the wall, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Even in sleep, Her face held tension, brows drawn together as if in perpetual worry. When she woke, Elijah took his turn, using his medical bag as a pillow. Sleep came in fitful bursts, filled with dreams of running, of hands reaching to grab him, of Aiko's face disappearing into darkness. He woke to her gentle touch on his shoulder. "The light is almost gone," she whispered. Elijah sat up, rubbing his face. Through the cracks in the door, he could see the sky had darkened to deep blue. Rain still fell, a steady drumming that would help cover their movements. "Good," he said. "Rain will make it harder for them to track us." He checked his supplies one last time. Bandages, antiseptic, compass, small knife, canteen half full of water. Not much for a dangerous journey, but it would have to do. As they prepared to leave, distant thunder rumbled, but it wasn't thunder. The rhythm was too regular, too mechanical. "Artillery," Elijah said. "Germans must be pushing back again." "Is that good or bad for us?" "Could be good. The fighting will distract the MPs, pull resources away from the search." The artillery grew louder, more frequent. Soon, they felt the ground tremble with each impact. "Time to go," Elijah said, reaching for the wooden door above them. The courtyard lay in near darkness. Artillery flashes lit the cloudy sky to the east. Each burst followed seconds later by the deep boom of impact. Rain fell steadily, turning the ground to mud and washing away footprints almost as soon as they were made. Elijah emerged first, scanning for guards. The shelling had created the distraction he'd hoped for. Soldiers ran toward defensive positions. Officers shouted orders. No one was watching the abandoned wine cellar entrance. He helped Aiko climb out, then pulled her into the shadow of a stone wall. "Stay close," he whispered. They moved along the wall, keeping to the deepest shadows. Twice they froze as soldiers hurried past, but no one noticed them in the chaos. At the edge of the courtyard, a gap in the wall offered access to the woods beyond. "Ready?" Elijah asked, pointing toward the trees. Aiko nodded, her face pale but determined in the intermittent flashes of artillery light. They ran bent low, across 20 yards of open ground. The mud sucked at their boots, making each step a struggle. Just as they reached the first trees, a shell landed closer than before, the explosion lighting the entire area in harsh white light. "Down!" Elijah pulled Aiko to the ground as debris rained around them. When the dust settled, they crawled deeper into the forest. Only when thick underbrush hid them from view did Elijah dare to stand again. "Are you hurt?" he asked, helping Aiko to her feet. She shook her head. "No. You?" "I'm fine." He took out his compass, tilting it toward a faint beam of moonlight that penetrated the clouds. "West is this way. We need to keep moving." They walked in silence, the sounds of battle fading behind them. The forest was dense, tree branches heavy with rain that dripped onto their shoulders. In places, the underbrush grew so thick they had to push through, thorns catching on their clothes. Aiko moved with surprising agility despite her exhaustion. When they came to a fallen log blocking the path, she climbed over without complaint, though Elijah saw her wince as the rough bark scraped her injured wrists. "We can rest if you need to," he offered. "No, keep moving." Her voice was soft but determined. "The farther we get tonight, the better chance we have tomorrow." An hour passed, then another. The artillery had stopped, but distant rumbles suggested the fighting continued elsewhere. They crossed a small stream, its waters swollen with rain, then climbed a gentle hill where the trees thinned enough to see the moonlight breaking through clouds. At the crest, Elijah paused, studying the valley below. A dirt road wound through fields toward a cluster of lights that marked a small village. "Not our destination," he said. "Too small to be St. D, but there might be patrols." "Can we go around?" "Have to, but it means more time in the open." He pointed to a ravine that cut across the valley floor. "That might give us cover." Down the hill, moving carefully on the slippery ground. Halfway down, Elijah heard voices, American voices, coming from the road below. "MPs," he whispered, pulling Aiko behind a thick oak tree. "Don't move." Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the base of the hill. Through the trees, they could make out several figures walking along the road, their voices carrying clearly in the night air. Waste of time. They're probably halfway to German lines by now. Orders are orders. Captain wants every road and path checked. Why's he so hot about one Jap nurse anyway? Not just her. That colored medic too. Rawlings says shoot on sight. Both of them? Seems extreme. You heard what happened to Wilson's patrol last week. One of those colored boys was passing information to the Germans. Command's not taking chances with another one. The flashlight beams moved along the road, then turned back toward the village. Elijah and Aiko remained frozen behind the tree until the voices faded completely. "They're saying black soldiers are spies," Aiko whispered. "That's not true." "No, it's not, but it's an excuse to treat us worse." Elijah peered around the tree trunk. "They're gone. Let's move." They continued down the hill, even more cautiously now, and slipped into the ravine at the bottom. It provided perfect cover, deep enough to hide them completely, with a small stream running along its base that covered the sounds of their movement. For half an hour, they followed the ravine, putting distance between themselves and the road. Only when the village lights had disappeared behind them did Elijah slow their pace. "Doing okay?" he asked, noticing Aiko's labored breathing. "Yes." She brushed wet hair from her face. "How much farther to your doctor friend?" 3 miles, maybe 4. "We won't make it tonight. Need to find somewhere to rest until morning." The ravine eventually shallowed and disappeared into flat farmland. They left its protection reluctantly, moving across open fields where they felt exposed despite the darkness. Rain had stopped, but the ground remained muddy, each step an effort. "Look," Aiko pointed ahead, "a building." Through the trees, Elijah could make out the dark shape of what appeared to be a small farmhouse. No lights showed from any window. "Might be abandoned," he said. "Let's check." As they approached, the damage became clear. One side of the roof had collapsed, windows were shattered, and the door hung from a single hinge. Recent shell damage, probably from an artillery round that had fallen short of its intended target. "Careful," Elijah said as they entered. "Floor might not be stable." Inside smelled of wet wood and smoke. Moonlight through the damaged roof revealed a simple one-room farmhouse, now mostly in ruins. A table lay overturned, chairs scattered across the room. In one corner stood a small stone fireplace, remarkably intact. "No one's been here since it was hit," Elijah said, examining footprints in the dust. "Should be safe until morning." Aiko sank onto a wooden bench, exhaustion finally claiming her. "What will happen tomorrow?" "We keep moving west, reach Moreau's clinic before dark." Elijah gathered broken pieces of furniture. "I'm going to risk a small fire. It's too cold in here." "Is that safe?" "We'll keep it tiny, just enough for some warmth. The chimney's still standing, and the smoke will be lost in the mist by morning." While Aiko rested, Elijah built a small fire in the fireplace, using dry wood from broken furniture. Soon, a faint orange glow cast long shadows around the room, and blessed warmth began to spread. He found a crumpled newspaper beside the overturned table and smoothed it out. The headline in French proclaimed, "Allies advance, liberators of moral truth." "Liberators," Elijah muttered, setting the paper aside. "Truth depends on who's telling it, I guess." Aiko moved to sit closer to the fire, extending her hands toward the heat. "Will they ever stop looking for us?" "Eventually, but not soon enough." Elijah sat beside her. "We need to reach Moreau. He can register you officially as a POW under Red Cross protection. Once that happens, they can't just make you disappear." "And you, what protection will you have?" Elijah had no answer for that. He stared into the small flames, watching them dance over the broken wood. "You should rest," he finally said. "I'll keep watch first." Aiko nodded, too tired to argue. She curled up on her side near the fire, using Elijah's spare blanket as both mattress and cover. Within minutes, her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Elijah watched her face in the firelight, finally relaxed in slumber. Who would have thought, even 2 days ago, that he would risk everything for this woman from the other side of the world? Yet here they were, both branded traitors for the simple act of seeing humanity in the enemy. Outside, an owl called into the night. Elijah added another small piece of wood to the fire and settled in for his watch, his medical bag beside him, the weight of his choices heavy but not regretted. Dawn arrived with a thin mist rising from the wet ground. Elijah, who had finally dozed off in the early morning hours, woke to find Aiko already up, carefully adding the last pieces of dry wood to their dying fire. "You should have woken me," he said, straightening from his uncomfortable position against the wall. "You needed rest too." She offered a small smile. "I kept watch." Elijah stretched his stiff muscles and went to the broken door, peering out at the misty landscape. Fields stretched toward distant woods, peaceful in the early light. No movement, no sign of patrols. "How's your strength?" he asked, turning back to her. "Better." Aiko rolled her shoulders. "The rest helped. The fire too. Good. We have a long walk ahead." Elijah checked his compass again. "If we keep to the woods as much as possible, we can reach Moreau's clinic by late afternoon." They ate the last of Elijah's ration biscuits, washing them down with water from his canteen. Neither mentioned how little food remained or how exposed their journey would be in daylight. As they prepared to leave, Elijah noticed Aiko studying the tattered French newspaper he'd found the night before. "Can you read it?" he asked. She nodded. "Some. I studied French in school." Her finger traced along a paragraph. "This says the Allies bring truth and justice to liberate Europe from darkness." She looked up. "Do you believe that?" Elijah considered the question. "I believe most soldiers on both sides think they're fighting for something right. But war makes monsters of good men. Makes it easy to forget what we're supposed to stand for. Yet you remember," she said softly. "Try to." He shouldered his medical bag. "Ready?" They left the farmhouse as the sun broke through morning clouds. The rain had passed, leaving a clear, cold day. They kept to the edges of fields where possible, using tree lines and hedgerows for cover. Twice they spotted vehicles on distant roads, American jeeps patrolling the countryside, and each time they hid until the danger passed. By midday, they had covered nearly 2 miles, moving slower than Elijah had hoped, but steadily westward. They paused to rest in a small grove of pine trees. Elijah checked Aiko's wrists, pleased to see the bandages had held and no fresh bleeding had occurred. "Tell me about your home," Aiko said as he worked. "In Georgia." Elijah's hands stilled momentarily. "Small town called Macon. Not much to tell." "You miss it?" "Parts of it." He resumed rewrapping one wrist with a clean bandage. "Miss my mother's cooking. The way summer evenings smell like magnolias and warm earth. The church choir on Sundays. But not everything." Elijah shook his head. "Hard to miss a place where you can't eat at most restaurants, can't use public restrooms, can't look a white person in the eye without risking a beating." His voice remained calm, matter-of-fact. "Army's not much different. Separate barracks, separate mess halls. Fighting and dying for a country that treats us like we're less than human." "Why do you do it then? Fight for them?" "Not fighting for them." Elijah finished with the bandage and sat back. "Fighting for what America's supposed to be, for what it could be." Aiko was quiet for a moment. "In Japan, we were taught Americans are savages, that you hate us because we are not white." She looked down at her freshly bandaged wrists. "Yet here you are, risking everything to save me. And there you were, saving a German child when your commanders ordered you to let him die." Elijah smiled slightly. "Maybe neither of us is very good at being what we're supposed to be." A distant engine sound interrupted them. Another patrol, coming closer this time. "We need to move," Elijah said, quickly packing his supplies. They continued westward, keeping to the deepest parts of the woods whenever possible. The terrain grew more difficult. Hills that left them breathless, dense underbrush that tore at their clothes, mud that made each step an effort. Aiko never complained, though. Elijah could see fatigue in the set of her shoulders, the careful way she placed each foot. When they came to a fallen log blocking their path, he offered his hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers cold but her grip strong. "Almost there," he encouraged as they crested yet another small hill. Maybe another hour, but at the top of the hill they stopped short. Below them, a narrow country road wound through the valley, and on that road, barely a quarter-mile ahead, stood an American checkpoint. Sandbags, a wooden barrier, 2 jeeps, and at least 6 MPs. "That wasn't there before," Elijah muttered. "They set up new roadblocks." "Can we go around?" Aiko asked. "Have to, but it means crossing open ground." He studied the landscape. "After dark would be safer." "We don't have food to wait that long." Elijah knew she was right. They were both already weak from hunger and exertion. Waiting hours in the cold would only make them less able to travel. "There's a path through those trees," he said, pointing to a dense section of forest that curved around the checkpoint. "If we stay deep in the woods, move quietly, we might make it past without being seen." Aiko nodded her agreement, and they started down the hill away from the road. The forest provided good cover, thick with pines and oaks whose branches filtered the afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. They moved in silence, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs. When they drew parallel to the checkpoint, they could hear the MPs talking, their voices carrying in the still air. "We've been out here all day for nothing. Orders say they might come this way." "Bullshit. They're long gone by now. Probably reached German lines already." "Why would a colored medic help a Jap reach German lines? Makes no sense." "Nothing makes sense in this damn war." Elijah and Aiko exchanged glances but kept moving, putting one silent step after another until the voices faded behind them. They had almost cleared the checkpoint when a new sound froze them in place. Footsteps approaching through the forest, coming their way. "Patrol," Elijah whispered, pulling Aiko behind a thick oak. "Don't move." The footsteps grew closer. At least 2 men moving through the underbrush, flashlight beams bouncing between trees though it was still daylight. "Check that ravine over there," a voice called. "Could hide a whole platoon." Elijah looked around desperately. The oak provided cover from one direction, but the patrol was spreading out. They would be spotted in moments. 20 feet away, he noticed a narrow ravine cutting through the forest floor, not deep, but enough to hide in. He pointed, and Aiko nodded understanding. Moving as quietly as possible, they slipped toward the ravine. Just as they reached it, a flashlight beam swept across the trees where they had been standing. "Thought I saw something," a voice said. "Over by that big oak." Elijah helped Aiko down into the ravine, then followed. They pressed themselves against the muddy slope as footsteps approached directly overhead. "Nothing here," said one MP, so close they could see his boots through the roots and earth of the ravine edge. "Just shadows." "Check the ravine anyway," Captain said to be thorough. Elijah's hand found his knife, the small one he used for medical procedures. A poor weapon, but their only defense if discovered. Boots appeared at the ravine edge, a flashlight beam sweeping down. Elijah pulled Aiko closer, both pressing into the deepest shadow beneath an overhanging root. "Empty," the MP called. "Just mud and water down there." "Waste of time," grumbled the other. "Rawlings has us chasing ghosts. Orders are to shoot the Jap and the colored traitor on sight." "You want to be the one to tell the captain we didn't check everywhere?" The MP laughed harshly. "Guess not. Let's finish this section and get back. I'm freezing my ass off out here." The boots moved away. Elijah and Aiko remained frozen, barely breathing, until the footsteps faded completely. "They have orders to shoot us," Aiko whispered, her face pale in the dim light of the ravine. Elijah nodded grimly, suspected as much. He noticed she was shivering, from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. "We need to keep moving. The clinic isn't far now." They climbed carefully from the ravine and continued through the forest, even more cautious than before. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, long shadows stretching between trees. They needed to reach the clinic before dark. After another mile, Elijah paused, studying a break in the trees ahead. "We're close. The clinic is just beyond that field." "Will your friend help us?" Iko asked. "Even knowing the Americans are looking for us?" "Moreau follows the Red Cross code. He'll help." Elijah hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. "Once you're registered as a POW under his care, they can't just make you disappear." "And you? What protection will you have?" Elijah had been avoiding that question in his own mind. "One problem at a time," he said gently. "First, we get you safe." They approached the edge of the forest cautiously. Before them stretched a wide field, golden with unmown wheat despite the late season. At the far end stood a cluster of stone buildings, the village where Dr. Moreau's clinic operated. "We'll need to cross the open ground," Elijah said. "No cover once we start. If they see us, they won't." He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Wait for my signal, then run as fast as you can toward those buildings." Elijah scanned the area carefully. No movement near the village, no vehicles on the narrow road that led to it. As the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened across the field, providing at least some concealment. "Now," he said. And they broke from the tree line together. Running through the wheat was harder than it looked. The stalks caught at their legs, slowing each step. Iko's smaller frame meant she struggled more than Elijah, but she kept pace, determination driving her forward. Halfway across, Elijah heard it, the distant rumble of engines, coming from the road to the east. He turned to look and saw dust rising above the trees. Vehicles approaching, fast. "Keep going," he urged, taking Iko's arm to help her move faster. Almost there. The wheat field seemed endless, the village buildings still too far away. The engine sounds grew louder. They wouldn't make it across before the patrol arrived. "There," Iko gasped, pointing toward a shallow ditch that ran along the edge of the field. "Hide?" They changed direction, stumbling toward the ditch and dropping into it just as two jeeps appeared on the road that bordered the field. MPs stood in the back of each vehicle, rifles ready, scanning the countryside. Elijah pulled Iko close, both lying flat in the shallow ditch, the wheat partially concealing them. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain the patrol would hear it. The jeep slowed as they approached the village, then stopped completely at a point not 50 yards from their hiding place. "Thompson, check the wheat field," ordered a voice Elijah recognized with a chill. Captain Rawlings himself had joined the search. "Rest of you, move into the village. Check every building. That medic knows someone here, I'm certain of it." A young MP jumped from the jeep and began walking into the wheat field, rifle ready. He moved methodically, sweeping his gaze across the golden stalks. "Sir, you really think they'd be stupid enough to come here?" the MP called back. "It's the first place we'd look." "That medic knows Dr. Moreau treats POWs," Rawlings replied. "He'll try to get the girl registered under Red Cross protection." The MP continued his sweep, moving closer to the ditch with each step. Elijah held his breath. Beside him, he felt Iko's body tense. The MP was now just 20 feet away, close enough that they could see his youthful face, uncertain beneath his helmet. He paused, frowning, looking directly at the ditch where they hid. For a long moment, no one moved. The MP's eyes narrowed, focusing on their hiding spot. Then, unexpectedly, he turned away. "Nothing here, sir," he called back to Rawlings. "Just wheat and shadows." "Move into the village then," Rawlings ordered. "They can't have gotten far." The jeeps continued toward the village, the MP jogging to catch up. Only when the vehicles disappeared between buildings did Elijah dare to breathe normally again. "He saw us," Iko whispered. "I know he did." Elijah nodded slowly, but he chose not to say anything. A thin ray of hope warmed his chest. Perhaps not everyone had lost their humanity to this war. They waited until dusk began to settle across the field before moving again. The village now presented a new danger, Rawlings and his men were searching every building, including, undoubtedly, Moreau's clinic. "We need to find shelter for the night," Elijah said. "Try again tomorrow when they've moved on." "Where?" Aiko asked, her voice thin with exhaustion. Elijah scanned their surroundings. "There," he said, pointing to a small structure at the edge of the field. A farmer's storage shed, half hidden by tall grass. "It's not much, but it'll keep us out of sight until morning." Rain began to fall again as they made their way to the shed, gentle at first, then harder, cold droplets that soaked through their already damp clothes. By the time they reached the small wooden building, both were shivering violently. The door creaked as Elijah pushed it open. Inside smelled of hay and old apples. A pile of burlap sacks in one corner offered the only bedding. But after 2 days of running, it looked like luxury. "Rest," Elijah told Aiko. "I'll keep watch." But Aiko shook her head, teeth chattering. "You've been awake longer than me. We both need to warm up." Elijah arranged the burlap sacks into a makeshift bed. "Lie down. Body heat will help." Too exhausted to argue, Aiko curled onto the sacks. Elijah lay beside her, not touching at first, uncertain of the propriety despite their desperate situation. "Closer," Aiko murmured. "Please, I can't stop shaking." Elijah moved nearer, letting her back press against his chest, his arm draping over her side. Gradually, their shared warmth began to fight off the chill. Aiko's shivering subsided, her breathing deepened. Outside, rain drummed steadily on the wooden roof. In the distance, they could hear vehicles moving in the village, shouted orders, doors being opened and closed as the search continued. "Will we make it?" Aiko asked softly, already half asleep. "Truly?" "Yes," Elijah promised, hoping he spoke truth. "Tomorrow we'll reach Moreau. You'll be safe. And you?" "Sleep now," he said gently. "Tomorrow will take care of itself." As Aiko drifted into exhausted slumber, Elijah remained awake, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of men hunting them. Whatever happened tomorrow, he knew one thing with certainty. He would get Aiko to safety, whatever the cost to himself. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through cracks in the shed walls. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and glittering with droplets. Elijah woke first, careful not to disturb Aiko as he sat up. His body ached from cold and exertion, muscles stiff from sleeping on hard ground. But they had survived another night. That alone counted as victory. Aiko stirred beside him, dark eyes opening slowly. For a moment she seemed confused, then memory returned, and with it, alertness. "Any sign of them?" she whispered. Elijah peered through a crack in the wooden wall. "Nothing moving out there. Let me check." He eased the door open just enough to scan the area. The field lay empty, peaceful in the morning light. No patrols visible, no movement near the village. "Looks clear," he reported. "But they could be waiting in the village. We need to be careful." Aiko sat up, wincing slightly. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish green. But new ones had formed where she'd fallen during their flight through the forest. "How far to the clinic?" she asked. "Edge of the village. Small stone building with a red cross painted on the door." Elijah offered his canteen, now almost empty. "Last water. Make it count." Aiko took a small sip, then handed it back. "You need it more." Elijah drank sparingly, then returned the canteen to his bag. "If we follow the ditch, we can approach from behind the buildings. Less chance of being spotted." They left the shed cautiously, staying low in the tall grass that surrounded it. The ditch they had hidden in yesterday continued along the field's edge, providing a path toward the village that offered some concealment. Moving slowly, stopping often to listen, they made their way toward the stone buildings. The village appeared quiet, too quiet perhaps. No civilians moved between houses. No smoke rose from chimneys despite the morning chill. "Something's wrong," Elijah murmured as they reached the first structures. Simple outbuildings behind a farmhouse. Village this size should have people out and about by now. "Curfew?" Aiko suggested. Maybe, or they've been warned to stay inside. He pointed to a narrow alley between buildings. This way. Moreau's clinic is just beyond that church. They slipped into the alley, keeping to shadows. The village center lay just ahead, a small square with a stone church, a few shops, and the clinic Elijah had described. From their position, they could see the Red Cross painted on a wooden door. But they also saw something else, an American Jeep parked directly in front of the clinic. "They're still here," Aiko whispered. Elijah nodded grimly, waiting for us. Rawlings must have left men behind. "What do we do?" Before Elijah could answer, church bells began to ring. Not the steady toll of the hour, but a frantic, irregular pattern. Moments later, people began emerging from buildings, hurrying toward the fields beyond the village. "Air raid warning," Elijah explained. "Those bells mean everyone should take cover outside the village." The MPs appeared from the clinic door, looking up at the sky, then running toward their jeep. As the vehicles sped away, following the evacuation route, Elijah saw their opportunity. "Now," he said, while everyone's focused on the sky. They ran across the square, heads down, moving as fast as Aiko's weakened condition allowed. The clinic door stood ajar in the MP's hasty departure. Inside, the small building was cool and dim. The front room served as a waiting area, with a doorway leading to what appeared to be an examination room beyond. Medical supplies lined wooden shelves, more than Elijah had seen in months on the front. "Dr. Moreau?" Elijah called softly. No answer came. The clinic seemed empty. "He must have evacuated with the others," Aiko said, disappointment heavy in her voice. "We'll wait." Elijah closed the front door. "He'll return once the all-clear sounds." Aiko sank onto a wooden bench, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The fever Elijah had noticed the previous day seemed worse. Her cheeks flushed, eyes too bright. "Let me check your wrists," he said, kneeling before her. The bandages needed changing. Beneath them, the rope wounds looked infected, red and swollen despite his care. Without proper antibiotics, infection could spread quickly. "You need medicine," he said, rising to search the shelves. "And real food, both of us do." He found a bottle of sulfanilamide powder and fresh bandages. Not penicillin, but better than nothing. As he treated her wrists, Aiko watched his face. "You're a good medic," she said softly. "Had lots of practice." He sprinkled the powder carefully over the wounds. 4 months on the line teaches you fast." "No, it's more than that. You see the person, not just the wound." She winced slightly as he wrapped fresh bandages. "That cannot be taught." Before Elijah could respond, the outer door opened. Both froze as footsteps entered the waiting room. A middle-aged man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses stopped short at the sight of them. He wore a civilian suit beneath a white doctor's coat, a stethoscope around his neck. "Dr. Moreau?" Elijah asked, standing slowly. The man's eyes moved from Elijah to Aiko, taking in their dirty uniforms, her bandaged wrists, their exhausted faces. "I am Moreau," he said in accented English. "And you, I think, are the ones the Americans have been searching for." He closed the door behind him. "The black medic and the Japanese nurse, yes?" Elijah nodded cautiously. "We need your help." "Do you know what you ask?" "The American captain has threatened to close my clinic if I harbor fugitives." "She's not a fugitive," Elijah said firmly. "She's a prisoner of war entitled to protection under the Geneva Convention and Red Cross protocols." Moreau studied them both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "You know your international law, Private?" "Cole, Elijah Cole, 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion." "And you," Moreau turned to Aiko. "Tanaka Aiko, nurse, Imperial Japanese Army." Moreau nodded, then moved to examine her more closely. Dehydration, exhaustion, infection beginning in these wounds. He looked at Elijah. "You've done well to keep it from spreading, given your limited supplies." "Will you help her?" Elijah asked. "Register her properly as a POW?" Moreau straightened. "Yes, I will admit her as a patient under Red Cross protection." His expression grew serious. "But you should know, Captain Rawlings will return soon. His men only left because of the air raid warning, and they have orders concerning both of you. To shoot on sight, Elijah said. We heard. Then you understand the danger. Moreau went to a cabinet and removed a bottle. She needs antibiotics, fluids, rest. You both need food. He handed Elijah the bottle. Penicillin. For her wrists. Thank you. Moreau called into the back room, and 2 French nurses appeared. They helped Aiko onto a stretcher, while Moreau explained her status in rapid French. The nurses nodded understanding, their faces showing no judgment, only professional concern. As they prepared to move Aiko to a treatment room, she reached out to grasp Elijah's hand. Don't leave, she whispered. Not yet. I won't, he promised. Rest now. You're safe. Outside, the all-clear sounded, the same church bells, now ringing in a steady pattern. People would soon return to the village, and with them, the American MPs. Elijah watched as the nurses wheeled Aiko away, her small form looking even more fragile on the white sheets. He had kept his promise, gotten her to safety, to medical care. Now came the harder question. What about his own fate? Moreau seemed to read his thoughts. The American captain will be back within the hour. If he finds you here? Elijah nodded understanding. I know the risk. Perhaps you could reach the next village before they return. I can give you food, directions. No. Elijah's voice was firm. I'm not leaving her until I know she's truly protected. Moreau studied him with newfound respect. Then we have very little time to prepare. The clinic's rear courtyard basked in midday sunlight. Stone walls enclosed the small space, offering privacy from the village beyond. Here, injured prisoners received fresh air and sunshine under the watchful eyes of French nurses. Elijah sat on a wooden bench, watching as Dr. Moreau examined Aiko, who lay on a stretcher nearby. The antibiotics had already begun working, the angry red of infection fading from her wrists, the fever cooling. Food and water had restored some color to her face. She will recover fully, Moreau said, returning to sit beside Elijah. The wounds were superficial, though painful. More concerning was the dehydration and exhaustion. Thank you, Elijah said simply. For everything. Moreau nodded. I've submitted the official registration. She is now documented as a prisoner of war under Red Cross protection. This gives her legal status, international oversight. So they can't just make her disappear. Exactly. To harm her now would violate international law, a serious breach even in wartime. Elijah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Aiko would be safe. Whatever happened to him now, he had accomplished what mattered most. As if sensing his thoughts, Moreau said quietly, You, however, have no such protection. When the Americans return, I know. Elijah looked toward the village, where people had resumed their daily activities after the false air raid. How long do I have? Minutes, perhaps. Their jeep was spotted entering the village. Elijah stood. Then I should go. The longer I stay, the more danger I bring to your clinic, to her. Where will you go? Back to my unit, if they'll have me. Turn myself in before they declare me a deserter. Elijah's voice remained steady. At least she's safe now. Before he could move toward the gate, they heard commotion from inside the clinic. Voices raised, boots on stone floors. Then the rear door burst open. Captain Rawlings stepped into the courtyard, flanked by 4 MPs. His cold eyes took in the scene. Aiko on the stretcher, Elijah standing beside Dr. Moreau. Well, Rawlings said, a thin smile spreading across his face. Our fugitives, together at last. Elijah stepped forward, placing himself between the Americans and Aiko. She's registered as a POW under Red Cross protection, Captain. Check the paperwork. Is she now? Rawlings glanced at Moreau. Rather convenient timing, Doctor. Moreau stood his ground. The registration is complete and legal, Captain Rawlings. This woman is now under international protection as a prisoner of war. Any harm to her would violate the Geneva Convention. Rawlings' smile faded. She was being transported for authorized questioning when this man, he jabbed a finger toward Elijah. interfered with military operations. That's a court-martial offense, Private Cole. I acted as a medic, sir. Elijah kept his voice respectful but firm. She was being mistreated, denied medical attention. My oath required me to intervene. Your oath? Rawlings laughed sharply. Your oath was to follow orders, soldier. My first oath was to do no harm. Elijah reached into his pocket and removed his dog tags. Here, sir, I'm not resisting arrest. Rawlings took the tags, studying them. Private Elijah Cole, 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. His lip curled slightly. One of our colored units, explains a lot. Behind them, the clinic door opened again. A crowd of villagers had gathered in the street beyond, drawn by the American vehicles and raised voices. They watched silently as the confrontation unfolded. Arrest him, Rawlings ordered the MPs. We'll sort this out back at headquarters. As two MPs stepped forward, Aiko struggled to sit up on her stretcher. No, she said, voice weak but determined. He saved my life. I was being tortured. Be quiet, Rawlings snapped. You're an enemy combatant with no right to speak here. Actually, Moreau interjected, as a registered POW under medical care, she has very specific rights, including the right to make a statement regarding her treatment. The crowd of villagers had grown larger. Among them stood the young MP who had seen Elijah and Aiko hiding in the ditch, but said nothing. His face showed conflict as he watched his fellow soldiers move to arrest Elijah. Rawlings noticed the gathering crowd, the whispers spreading among them. His confidence seemed to waver slightly. This man kidnapped a prisoner, he insisted, interfered with military intelligence operations. He'll be court-martialed accordingly. Elijah said nothing as the MPs approached. He had known this moment would come from the instant he cut Aiko free in that courtyard. Some choices came with costs. Some principles required sacrifice. As the MPs reached for his arms, he looked back at Aiko. Their eyes met across the courtyard, hers filled with gratitude and sorrow, his with acceptance and a strange peace. Whatever came next, he had remained true to his deepest belief that all human life deserved protection and dignity, even, perhaps especially in war, even when orders said otherwise, even when the cost was his own freedom. The MPs led him toward the gate. Behind them, the German squad that had been moving through the area stopped at the farmhouse. One soldier, searching for supplies, discovered the loose floorboard where they had hidden. For a moment, Elijah feared discovery, but another soldier called him away. Luckily, the Germans moved on, leaving the farmhouse quiet once more. Through it all, Elijah and Aiko maintained their resolve, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they had acted with courage and compassion in a world torn by hatred and fear. Elijah stood straight-backed as the MPs secured his wrists with handcuffs. The cold metal bit into his skin, a bitter reminder of the ropes that had cut into Aiko's wrists days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. Move out, Rawlings ordered. I want him processed before nightfall. Dr. Moreau stepped forward. Captain, this man brought a wounded prisoner to receive proper medical care. That shows courage and humanity, not criminality. Save your lectures for the French, Doctor. Rawlings turned away dismissively. This is American military business. As the MPs began leading Elijah toward the gate, Aiko struggled to sit up on her stretcher. Please, she called weakly. He only helped because I needed medical attention. The ropes were cutting into my flesh. I was tied outside in the rain. Several villagers murmured angrily at this. More had gathered now, watching with concerned faces as the Americans prepared to take Elijah away. The younger MP, the one who had seen them hiding in the wheat field but said nothing, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes meeting Elijah's briefly before darting away. Let's go, one of the MPs said, pushing Elijah forward. They had almost reached the gate when an elderly Frenchman stepped into their path. White-haired and stooped, but with eyes bright with defiance, he spoke rapidly in French. Dr. Moreau translated. He says he remembers when Germans took a neighbor away for helping a wounded British airman. Good men stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. He says this black soldier is a good man. Other villagers nodded agreement. The crowd had grown thicker, forming a barrier between the Americans and their vehicles parked in the street beyond. "Move aside," Rawlings ordered, hand moving to his sidearm. "This is military business." No one moved. Instead, more villagers pressed forward, their faces set with quiet determination. They had seen too much cruelty in this war to stand by while another injustice occurred. Rawlings glanced at his men, then at the growing crowd. His authority was slipping, and he knew it. "This man is a deserter," he tried again. "He abandoned his post, interfered with a prisoner transfer." "I never deserted, sir," Elijah said calmly. "I acted as a medic when I saw someone in need. I intended to return to my unit once the nurse received proper care." The younger MP, his name tag read Jenkins, cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe we should just report that we found them. Take the private back to his unit and let the commanding officer decide." Rawlings' face darkened. "Are you questioning my authority, Private Jenkins?" "No, sir," Jenkins replied quickly. "Just suggesting a procedural approach." The standoff continued for several tense moments. Villagers blocking the exit, MPs uncertain what to do, Rawlings clearly calculating his options. Finally, Dr. Moreau broke the silence. "Captain, may I suggest a compromise? The nurse remains here under Red Cross protection. Take Private Cole back to his commanding officer with a full report. By the book, yes? That would satisfy regulations while respecting the crowd's concerns." Rawlings looked at the determined faces surrounding him, then at his small squad of MPs. With obvious reluctance, he nodded. "Fine, we'll do this by the book." He pointed at Elijah. "But you're still under arrest, Private. And I'll make damn sure your CO knows exactly what you did." "Yes, sir," Elijah replied evenly. As the MPs prepared to move out, Elijah turned to look at Aiko one last time. She sat upright now, supported by a French nurse, her eyes fixed on his face. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Elijah managed a small smile and a nod before the MPs led him through the crowd, which parted reluctantly to let them pass. Outside the clinic courtyard, 2 jeeps waited. The MPs directed Elijah into the back of the first one, his handcuffed wrists making it difficult to climb in. Jenkins, the younger MP, gave him a discreet helping hand. As the jeep engine started, Elijah looked back at the clinic gate. Aiko stood there, supported between 2 nurses, her small figure seeming fragile yet somehow unbroken. Dr. Moreau stood beside her, one hand protectively on her shoulder. The jeep lurched forward, carrying Elijah away from the woman he had risked everything to save. He didn't regret it, not for a moment. Whatever punishment awaited him, he had done what was right. They drove out of the village, passing stone houses and curious faces. Children stopped their play to watch the American jeeps pass. An old woman crossing the street made the sign of the cross when she saw Elijah's handcuffed wrists. Once beyond the village limits, the road stretched empty before them, bordered by fields still golden with unharvested wheat. The November air felt colder now, wind cutting through Elijah's thin uniform. "Here," Jenkins said quietly, passing him a canteen. "You look like you could use this." Elijah nodded gratefully and took an awkward drink with his cuffed hands. The water tasted better than anything he could remember. "You really do all this just because she was hurt?" Jenkins asked, voice low enough that Rawlings, riding in the jeep ahead, couldn't hear. "Yes," Elijah replied simply. Jenkins looked troubled. "They said you were helping the enemy, betraying your country." "I'm a medic. My job is to help wounded people." "She was wounded." Elijah handed the canteen back. "Seemed pretty simple to me." "Nothing simple in this war," Jenkins muttered, but something in his expression had softened. The jeeps continued along the country road, heading east toward the front lines where Elijah's unit was stationed. The afternoon sun slanted through bare trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. Exhaustion pulled at him after days of running, hiding, constant tension. But beneath the fatigue lay a deep sense of peace. Aiko was safe now, protected by international law and Dr. Moreau's determination. Whatever happened to him, that knowledge was enough. The jeep hit a pothole, jolting him from his thoughts. His wrists ached where the handcuffs cut into them, a small discomfort compared to what he might face when they reached headquarters. Ahead, the road divided. The first jeep, with Rawlings, took the left fork, the direct route back to the chateau where Elijah's unit was based. But to Elijah's surprise, Jenkins directed their driver to take the right fork. "Sir?" the driver questioned. "Captain Rawlings went left." "I know," Jenkins said. "We're taking a detour. Need to check something at the next village. We'll catch up." The driver shrugged and followed the instruction, turning right while Rawlings' jeep disappeared down the left road. When they had traveled about half a mile, out of sight of the main road, Jenkins ordered the driver to stop. "Take 5, Williams," he told the driver. "Stretch your legs. Smoke if you've got 'em." Looking confused but not unhappy about the break, Williams climbed out and wandered a few yards away to light a cigarette. Jenkins turned to face Elijah in the back seat. "Listen," he said urgently. "I don't have much time. Rawlings plans to make an example of you. He's been talking about a firing squad, claiming you're a spy or something." Cold fear washed through Elijah. "On what grounds?" "Doesn't matter. He's got rank and you're—" Jenkins hesitated. "Black," Elijah finished for him. Jenkins nodded uncomfortably. "Look, I saw you in that wheat field. Could have reported you right then, but something didn't feel right about hunting down a medic who was just helping someone." He glanced toward the driver, making sure he was still out of earshot. 3 miles down this road, there's a trail into the woods, leads to a resistance safe house. French might be able to get you to Allied lines, where you can surrender to someone who'll give you a fair hearing." Elijah stared at him. "You're helping me escape? I'm giving you a chance at justice." Jenkins produced a small key and quickly unlocked the handcuffs. "Williams will back me up. We'll say you jumped us during the cigarette break." "Why risk it?" Elijah rubbed his sore wrists. "You don't know me." Jenkins was quiet for a moment. "My kid brother's a medic in the Pacific. Always says taking care of the wounded is sacred duty. Doesn't matter what uniform they wear." He looked away. "Guess I wanted to do right by him, somehow." Elijah nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've got maybe 5 minutes before I start shouting that you escaped. That trail I mentioned? Look for 3 white stones stacked on the right side of the road. Path starts there." Elijah climbed out of the jeep, legs stiff after the long ride. "The nurse," he said. "Will she be all right? Moreau's got her registered proper now. Rawlings can't touch her without causing an international incident." Jenkins managed a tight smile. "She's safe. Now go. And Cole, good luck." Elijah nodded once more, then turned and walked calmly into the dense woods beside the road. Only when the jeep was out of sight did he break into a run. The forest path narrowed as it wound deeper among ancient oaks and towering pines. Elijah moved quickly, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the road. Behind him, faintly, he heard Jenkins shouting, the promised diversion to explain his escape. Fallen leaves cushioned his footsteps, but branches caught at his uniform, as if the forest itself tried to hold him back. The November air had grown colder as afternoon faded toward evening. His breath came in white puffs, hanging briefly in the still air before dissolving. After 20 minutes of steady movement, Elijah paused to catch his breath and get his bearings. Jenkins had mentioned a resistance safe house, but how far? And would the French partisans welcome an American soldier, especially one being hunted by his own army? The sound of water drew him forward again. A small river cut through the forest, its surface reflecting the darkening sky above. The path followed its winding course before crossing at a shallow ford marked by flat stepping stones. Elijah crossed carefully, boots slipping on moss-covered rocks. On the far bank, he spotted what Jenkins had described, 3 white stones stacked in a small cairn. Beside them, almost invisible unless you knew to look, a narrow trail led deeper into the woods. He followed it as twilight settled around him. The forest grew darker, tree branches forming a canopy that blocked the fading light. Twice he had to stop and search for the path when it seemed to disappear among fallen logs or dense underbrush. Just when he feared he'd lost his way completely, Elijah smelled wood smoke. Moments later, he glimpsed a faint orange glow through the trees ahead. He approached cautiously. In a small clearing stood a stone cottage, smoke rising from its chimney, warm light spilling from shuttered windows. It looked peaceful, ordinary, the perfect hiding place. Before he could step into the clearing, a voice spoke from the darkness behind him. "American?" Elijah froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Yes, American medic." A figure emerged from the shadows, a wiry Frenchman in his 40s, face weathered by years outdoors. He carried a hunting rifle, not pointed at Elijah, but ready. "Why are you here?" the man asked in accented English. "An MP named Jenkins told me to find this place, said you might help me reach Allied lines." The Frenchman studied him for a long moment. "Jenkins? Yes, we know him. He helps sometimes." His eyes narrowed. "But why does an American soldier need help reaching his own army?" Elijah lowered his hand slowly. "It's complicated. I helped a Japanese POW who was being mistreated. Now my commanding officer wants me arrested or worse." "Ah," understanding dawned in the Frenchman's eyes. "And you are a colored soldier. This makes more sense now." He lowered his rifle completely. "Come, inside is warm. We will talk." The cottage interior was simple but comfortable. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and rough wooden furniture filled the single room. A woman stirred something in a pot hanging over the fire, and two children sat at a table, working on what appeared to be school lessons, despite the war raging around them. "I am Marcel," the Frenchman said, hanging his rifle on pegs by the door. "This is my wife, Simone, and our children, Henri and Marie." Simone nodded a greeting, her eyes curious but not unfriendly. The children stared openly at Elijah. Perhaps they had never seen a black person before. "Thank you for welcoming me," Elijah said. "I'm Elijah Cole, medic with the 320th. Sit." Marcel gestured to a chair near the fire. "You look cold and hungry. Both we can fix." Elijah sank gratefully into the offered seat. The warmth of the fire seeped into his chilled bones, while Simone ladled something that smelled wonderfully of herbs and vegetables into a wooden bowl. As he ate, a simple but delicious stew of rabbit and root vegetables, Elijah explained his situation. Marcel and Simone listened without interruption, though their expressions darkened when he described how Aiko had been tied outdoors in the cold rain. "So," Marcel said when Elijah finished, "you helped this nurse because it was right, and now your officers want to punish you for showing humanity." He shook his head. "This war makes monsters of good men." "Not all," Elijah said, thinking of Jenkins, of Dr. Moreau, of Marcel himself. "There are still people who remember what matters." "Yes, but they are becoming harder to find." Marcel refilled Elijah's bowl. "Eat. Tomorrow will be difficult. You'll help me?" Marcel nodded. "We will take you to Saint-Dié. There is a doctor there, not Moreau, another, who helps send escaped prisoners back through the lines. He can get you to American forces who will listen to your story, not just punish you." "Why would you risk this for me?" Simone spoke for the first time, her voice soft but firm. "Because we have seen too much cruelty in this war. Too many people looking away when they should stand up." She glanced at her children. "We want them to know there are still good people in this world, people who do right thing even when it is dangerous." Elijah nodded, understanding completely. It was the same reason he had cut Aiko free in that courtyard. Because some actions define who we are, even when they come with a cost. After the meal, Marcel spread a map on the table. "Tomorrow we cross the river here." He pointed to a spot marked with a small X. "Then through these hills, American lines are here, about 5 miles beyond Saint-Dié. The doctor I spoke of will arrange transport. And if we're stopped? You are escaped prisoner I am turning in for reward." Marcel smiled slightly. Germans or Americans, they believe this story. Later, as Elijah settled onto a pallet near the fire, exhaustion finally caught up with him. For the first time in days, he felt safe enough to truly rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in this small cottage deep in the French forest, he allowed himself to believe that things might somehow work out. His last thoughts before sleep claimed him were of Aiko. Was she resting comfortably in Dr. Moreau's clinic? Had the infection in her wrists cleared? Would she recover her strength, not just physical, but the deeper strength that had allowed her to survive being called traitor by both sides? And would he ever see her again? Dawn arrived with a gentle touch of pale light filtering through the cottage windows. Elijah woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the weak army substitute he'd grown accustomed to. For a moment, disoriented by comfort and warmth, he couldn't remember where he was. Then Marcel's voice brought him fully awake. "Good morning, American. Sleep well?" Elijah sat up, rubbing his face. "Better than I have in months." "Good. You will need strength today." Marcel handed him a steaming mug. "It is not much, but it's hot." The coffee tasted rich and earthy, nothing like the thin liquid served at mess. Elijah savored it while watching Simone prepare a simple breakfast of dark bread and preserved fruit. "The children?" he asked, noticing their absence. "With their grandmother in the village," Simone replied. "Safer for them not to know our plans today." Marcel nodded agreement. Too many ears listening, too many eyes watching. Even children can say wrong thing at wrong time. After breakfast, Marcel brought Elijah clean clothes, simple French workman's garments that would draw less attention than his American uniform. "Your uniform, hide in this." Marcel handed him a burlap sack. "If we are stopped, better they not find it." Elijah changed quickly, surprised by how different he felt in civilian clothes. For months, the uniform had been his second skin, a constant reminder of his duty and place. Without it, he felt oddly vulnerable, yet somehow freer. By mid-morning, they were ready to leave. Simone embraced her husband, whispering something in French that Elijah couldn't catch. Then, to his surprise, she turned and embraced him as well. "Be careful," she said simply. "Come back if you need shelter again." The day had grown overcast, clouds hanging low over the forest. Marcel led the way along paths so faint Elijah would never have found them alone. They moved in silence, Marcel occasionally raising a hand to signal a stop when he heard something concerning. After an hour, they reached the river Marcel had shown on his map. Wider and faster flowing than the small stream Elijah had crossed earlier, it presented a more significant obstacle. "No bridge?" he asked. Marcel shook his head. "Too obvious. Germans watch bridges." He pointed downstream. "There, we cross there." There turned out to be a series of large rocks creating a natural, if precarious, path across the churning water. Marcel went first, moving with the confidence of someone who had made this crossing many times. Elijah followed more cautiously, his medical bag and the sack containing his uniform adding to the challenge. Halfway across, his foot slipped on a wet stone. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered on the edge of falling into the cold current. Then Marcel's hand shot out, steadying him. "Careful," the Frenchman said, gripping Elijah's arm until he regained his balance. "Water is very cold this time of year." They completed the crossing without further incident, then continued through increasingly hilly terrain. The forest thinned as they climbed, giving way to rocky slopes with scattered pines and open meadows. "From the top, we can see Saint-Dié," Marcel said as they neared the crest of a particularly steep hill. "And perhaps any patrols between us and the town." At the summit, they paused to catch their breath. The view was stunning, rolling hills giving way to a valley where the town of Saint-Dié nestled beside a river. Church spires rose above stone buildings, smoke curling from chimneys in the cold air. But Elijah's attention was drawn to movement on the road leading into town. A convoy of vehicles, American jeeps and trucks, moved steadily along the valley floor. Reinforcements? Marcel wondered, shading his eyes to see better. Elijah shook his head. Looks like a search party. Too many jeeps, not enough trucks for reinforcements. Searching for you think? Possibly, or just routine patrol. Elijah studied the convoy's progress. Either way, we need to avoid that road. Marcel pointed to a faint path that descended the hillside at an angle away from the main road. This way is longer but safer. Comes into town near the doctor's house. They made their way down the steep path, using tree branches for support when the footing grew treacherous. By midday, they had reached the valley floor, where fields stretched toward the outskirts of Saint-Dié. The town appeared larger as they approached, not a small village like where Doctor lived. Moreau's clinic stood, but a proper town with several hundred buildings. American flags flew from some windows, indicating the Allied presence. Others remained bare, their occupants perhaps less enthusiastic about their liberators. Marcel led them along the edges of fields, staying close to hedgerows and tree lines for cover. As they neared the first houses, he slowed. "From here, we must be very careful," he said quietly. "French who help Americans are heroes. French who help colored American running from military police." He shrugged. "Not all will understand." Elijah nodded. The same prejudices that plagued him back home existed here too, sometimes made worse by the stress and deprivation of war. They skirted the town's main entrance, instead approaching through a series of small vegetable gardens behind stone houses. Chickens scratched in the dirt, and laundry hung from lines stretched between buildings, offering additional cover. A few civilians noticed them but looked away quickly, unwilling to acknowledge strangers moving furtively through their town. Years of occupation had taught the French when to see nothing. Marcel stopped behind a two-story stone house with blue shutters. A small wooden door led into what appeared to be a garden shed attached to the rear of the building. "Wait here," he whispered. "I will make sure it is safe." Elijah pressed himself against the stone wall, trying to look inconspicuous as Marcel knocked a specific pattern on the door. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. After a moment, the door opened slightly. A whispered conversation in French followed. Then Marcel beckoned Elijah forward. Inside, the shed connected directly to the house through another door. They entered a warm kitchen where a thin, elderly man in wire-rimmed glasses waited. His white hair contrasted sharply with his black clothing. "This is Dr. Baudin," Marcel said. "He will help you now." Dr. Baudin examined Elijah with keen eyes. "So, you are the medic who saved the Japanese nurse. Word travels fast in wartime." "You've heard about that?" Elijah asked, surprised. "Of course. It is not every day an American risks his life for an enemy." Baudin gestured for him to sit at a small wooden table. "Marcel tells me you need to reach American lines where you can surrender to someone who will listen to your story." "Yes, my commanding officer wants me court-martialed or worse for helping the nurse." Baudin nodded thoughtfully. "I know an American chaplain, a good man. He visits wounded soldiers here sometimes. He might arrange a proper hearing for you." The doctor poured 3 glasses of wine from a dusty bottle. "But first, you must rest. You look exhausted." As they sipped the wine, sour but warming, church bells rang in the distance. The sound made Elijah tense, remembering the air raid warning at Dr. Moreau's village. "Just noon bells," Baudin assured him. "Though they serve other purposes these days. Different patterns can warn of German patrols or signal resistance meetings." A sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Marcel and Baudin exchanged alarmed glances. "Expecting someone?" Marcel asked. Baudin shook his head. "No, and friends use the back door." "Hide," Marcel whispered to Elijah. "Quickly." Elijah grabbed his medical bag and followed Baudin to a narrow door hidden behind a bookcase. It opened to reveal a small closet, barely large enough for one person. "Wait here," Baudin instructed. "No matter what you hear, do not come out until one of us opens this door. Understood?" Elijah nodded and stepped into the cramped space. The door closed, leaving him in darkness broken only by thin lines of light around the edges. Through the door, he heard muffled voices. Baudin, answering the front door, a brief conversation in French, then heavier footsteps entering the house. American voices, military police. Conducting a town-wide search, Doctor. Escaped prisoner, dangerous. I have seen no strangers, came Baudin's calm reply. Mind if we look around? Elijah held his breath as footsteps moved through the house, opening doors, checking rooms. They came closer, entering the very room where his hiding place was concealed. What's behind the bookcase? A voice asked. Just a storage closet, Baudin replied, for medical supplies. A tense pause followed. Then, all right, sorry to disturb you, Doctor. If you see anything suspicious, report it immediately to the command post. Of course. I am a loyal friend to America. The footsteps retreated. The front door opened and closed. Still, Elijah waited in darkness, heart pounding, until the hidden door finally opened to reveal Marcel's concerned face. They are gone, Marcel said, but they are searching every house in town. You cannot stay here. Dr. Baudin appeared behind him. There is a root cellar beneath the garden. You will be safer there until I can contact the chaplain. As they hurried toward the garden door, Marcel suddenly held up his hand. Listen. Outside, the church bells had begun to ring again. Not the steady toll of the hour, but an irregular pattern similar to what Elijah had heard at Moreau's village. That's the warning, Baudin said grimly. American roadblocks going up around the town. They're sealing all exits. The root cellar smelled of earth and stored vegetables. A single electric bulb, connected to the house by a frayed wire, cast weak yellow light over rough stone walls and dirt floor. Wooden shelves lined one side, holding jars of preserved food and bins of potatoes and onions. Elijah sat on an upturned crate, watching Dr. Baudin descend the narrow steps with a tray of bread, cheese, and another bottle of wine. You should eat, the elderly doctor said, placing the tray on a small table. It may be some time before the roadblocks are lifted. Have you heard anything more? Elijah asked, accepting a piece of cheese. Baudin nodded gravely. Marcel went to the square to listen. The Americans are searching for a dangerous deserter. You, I presume. They claim you attacked 2 MPs and escaped custody. Elijah winced. Jenkins had clearly made his story convincing. There's more, Baudin continued. A Captain Rawlings is offering a reward for information. He has told the townspeople you stole military supplies and may be working with German agents. That's ridiculous, Elijah protested. I just helped a wounded prisoner. How does that make me a German spy? War gives cruel men excuses for cruelty. Baudin poured wine into 2 chipped cups. This Rawlings, he sounds like a man who enjoys his power too much. Elijah took a sip of the sour wine. What happens now? We wait. I have sent word to the chaplain I mentioned. If he can come, he will arrive after dark. Baudin settled onto another crate. In the meantime, perhaps you will tell me about this nurse you saved. It must be quite a story. For the next hour, Elijah recounted everything that had happened since he first saw Aiko tied in the chateau courtyard. Baudin listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly letting Elijah speak. So you risked your future for a woman you had just met? The doctor said when Elijah finished. Because it was right. I couldn't walk away, Elijah said simply. Not and still call myself a medic, or a human being. Baudin smiled slightly. Marcel was right about you. Even in war, some people remember what matters. A soft knock interrupted them, 3 taps in quick succession. Baudin rose and climbed the steps to open the cellar door. Marcel slipped inside, accompanied by a tall American officer in a chaplain's uniform. Chaplain Thomas, Baudin said by way of introduction. This is Elijah Cole, the medic I told you about. Elijah stood quickly, uncertain whether to salute. The chaplain, a middle-aged white man with kind eyes and a serious expression, solved the problem by extending his hand instead. Private Cole, I've heard quite a story about you. Sir, I can explain. No need. Dr. Baudin has told me the essentials. The chaplain sat on the crate Baudin had vacated. What I want to know is, was helping this Japanese nurse worth the trouble you're in now? Elijah met the chaplain's gaze steadily. Yes, sir. She needed help, and I'm a medic. That's all there was to it. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. Captain Rawlings has filed serious charges: desertion, assaulting NPs, interfering with a prisoner transfer. The chaplain's voice remained neutral. He's pushing for a field court-martial, which would be conducted quickly with minimal defense. I didn't desert, sir. I always intended to return to my unit once the nurse was safe, and I never assaulted anyone. I believe you. Thomas leaned forward. But Rawlings has rank and influence. If you're caught here, I'm not sure I can help you. What are my options, sir? The chaplain glanced at Marcel, then back to Elijah. The resistance can move you further west, eventually to England. You'd be safe there, but you'd also be a fugitive. And my other option? I can arrange for you to surrender directly to Colonel Wilson at headquarters. He's a fair man, by the book but decent. He'll ensure you get a proper hearing. Thomas hesitated. But I can't guarantee the outcome. The charges are serious. Elijah considered his choices. Running meant safety, but also meant living as a deserter, something he wasn't. Surrendering meant facing military justice, which had rarely been kind to black soldiers. The nurse, he said finally. Do you know if she's all right? Still at Dr. Moreau's clinic? She's recovering well, according to my information, Thomas replied. Moreau has her properly registered as a POW under Red Cross protection. She's safe. Relief washed through Elijah. Whatever happened to him now, he had accomplished what mattered most. I'll surrender, he decided. I'm not a deserter, and I won't live like one. Thomas nodded approval. I thought you might say that. I'll make the arrangements, but not tonight. Roadblocks are still up and patrols are heavy. Tomorrow, when things have calmed down. After the chaplain left, promising to return the next evening, Elijah felt oddly at peace. The path ahead remained uncertain, but at least he would face it honestly. Marcel brought blankets and a pillow later, transforming a corner of the cellar into a makeshift bed. You are brave, the Frenchman said as he worked. Surrendering takes more courage than running sometimes. Not brave, Elijah corrected, just trying to live right. As night fell, Elijah stretched out on his simple bed, exhaustion soon pulling him toward sleep. His last conscious thought was of Aiko, hoping she was warm, safe, healing, hoping that someday, when this war finally ended, she might find her way home. Or perhaps to a new home where she wouldn't be judged by the uniform she had once worn, but by the humanity she had shown when it mattered most. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Elijah remained hidden in the root cellar, while above him, life in Saint-Dié continued. Through the small ground-level window, he could hear distant voices, vehicles passing, even children playing. Sounds of normalcy that seemed to belong to another world. Dr. Bodine visited several times, bringing food and news. The roadblocks remained, but searches had become less intensive. Rawlings had been recalled to headquarters for some urgent matter, leaving local MPs in charge of the hunt. This is good, Bodine explained. Without Rawlings pushing them, the MPs will soon lose interest. They have other duties. By late afternoon, Marcel reported that most roadblocks had been removed. Only the main roads remained under guard. Chaplain Thomas will come after dark, he told Elijah. He has arranged everything with Colonel Wilson. Evening arrived with a gentle rain that pattered against the cellar window. Elijah changed back into his uniform, carefully folding the civilian clothes Marcel had loaned him. Whatever happened next, he would face it as a soldier. Shortly after 8 o'clock, footsteps on the cellar stairs announced the chaplain's arrival. Thomas looked tired but determined. "Ready, Private?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Thomas explained the plan. They would drive directly to headquarters, where Colonel Wilson waited to receive Elijah's surrender. The chaplain had arranged for a fair hearing the following day, with himself present as a character witness. Best case scenario, you're reduced in rank and reassigned, Thomas said frankly. Worst case, he didn't need to finish. They both knew the potential consequences for the charges Rawlings had filed. Elijah thanked Dr. Bodine and Marcel for their help. The elderly doctor clasped his hand warmly. You did a good thing, helping that nurse, Bodine said. Never regret it, whatever happens. Outside, rain fell steadily from a black sky. The chaplain's jeep waited behind the house, its engine silent to avoid attracting attention. Thomas took the wheel while Elijah settled into the passenger seat, pulling his cap low over his face. We'll use back roads as much as possible, Thomas explained as they moved slowly through darkened streets. Less chance of running into patrols. They left Saint-Dié via a narrow farm track that bypassed the main checkpoint. For half an hour, they traveled in silence, windshield wipers barely keeping up with the rain. Occasional lightning illuminated the countryside. Empty fields, scattered farmhouses, the distant shadow of forest. Eventually, they turned onto a wider road that Elijah recognized. They were approaching the chateau where his unit was based, where he had first found Aiko tied in the rain. Almost there, Thomas said. Headquarters is at the old hotel just beyond the chateau. Colonel Wilson is waiting in his office. As they neared the chateau, Elijah's pulse quickened. Through rain-streaked windows, he could make out the stone courtyard where his journey had begun. Had it only been 4 days? It felt like a lifetime. They passed the chateau and continued to a large stone building that had once been the town's finest hotel. Now American flags flew from its windows and armed guards stood at the entrance. Thomas parked near a side door and turned to Elijah. Last chance to change your mind. No, sir, I'm ready. The chaplain nodded. I'll be with you every step. They entered through the side door, where Thomas showed his identification to the guard. Inside, the hotel's former grandeur remained visible despite its conversion to military use. Marble floors, ornate chandeliers, gilded mirrors reflecting the movements of officers and clerks hurrying through corridors. Thomas led Elijah to an elevator operated by a young private who stared curiously at the bedraggled black soldier accompanying the chaplain. They rode to the 3rd floor in silence. Colonel Wilson's office had once been a luxury suite. Now maps covered the walls, and a massive desk dominated the space where a bed had likely stood. Behind the desk sat Wilson himself, a tall, lean man in his 50s with steel gray hair and eyes to match. Chaplain, he acknowledged as they entered. His gaze shifted to Elijah. This must be Private Cole. Yes, sir, Thomas confirmed. As arranged, he's surrendering himself voluntarily. Wilson studied Elijah with an unreadable expression. You've caused quite a stir, Private. Captain Rawlings wants your head on a platter. I understand, sir. Do you? Wilson leaned forward. The charges against you are serious. Desertion alone carries severe penalties in wartime. Sir, I never intended to desert, Elijah said firmly. I was trying to get medical attention for a prisoner who was being mistreated. So the chaplain has told me. Wilson's expression remained neutral. You'll have a chance to make your case tomorrow at the hearing. For tonight, you'll be held in the stockade. He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later, 2 MPs entered the office. Take Private Cole to the stockade, Wilson ordered. He surrendered voluntarily. So there's no need for restraints unless he gives you trouble. His eyes met Elijah's. He won't. No, sir, Elijah confirmed. As the MPs prepared to escort him out, the door burst open. Captain Rawlings stormed in, face flushed with anger. Sir, I was told the deserter had been captured, he began, then stopped short when he saw Elijah standing there. What is this? Why isn't he in handcuffs? Captain Rawlings, Wilson said coolly. Private Cole has surrendered voluntarily. Chaplain Thomas brought him in. Rawlings' eyes narrowed. Surrendered? After assaulting my men and running? He should be in chains. That will be for the hearing to determine, Wilson replied. For now, he's being cooperative. A hearing? Rawlings' voice rose. Sir, with respect, field court-martial is the appropriate response here. This man deserted his post. interfered with a prisoner transfer, assaulted military police. Enough. Wilson's quiet command cut through Rawlings' tirade. I've reviewed your report, Captain. There are inconsistencies that warrant further examination. Inconsistencies? Sir, That will be all, Captain. Wilson's tone left no room for argument. Private Cole will receive a fair hearing tomorrow at 0900 hours. You'll be expected to present your case then. Rawlings straightened, barely containing his fury. Yes, sir. He glared at Elijah. Until tomorrow, Private. After Rawlings stormed out, Wilson sighed heavily. That man has a personal stake in this that goes beyond military discipline. Any idea why? No, sir, Elijah replied, though he suspected it had something to do with Aiko's escape reflecting poorly on Rawlings' competence. Well, get some rest, Private. Tomorrow won't be easy. Wilson nodded to the MPs. Take him down. As the MPs led Elijah from the office, Thomas touched his arm briefly. I'll be there tomorrow. Trust in the truth. The stockade occupied what had once been the hotel's wine cellar, an irony not lost on Elijah after his recent hiding places. The cell they placed him in was small but clean, with a cot, blanket, and bucket for necessities. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing in the stone chamber. Alone at last, Elijah sat on the edge of the cot and bent his head. Not in despair, but in quiet prayer, for strength, for clarity, and for Aiko, wherever she might be. Morning arrived with the sound of keys rattling in the cell door. Elijah, who had slept fitfully on the narrow cot, sat up as an MP entered. Hearing in 1 hour, the MP announced. Got you some breakfast and clean water to wash up. He placed a tray on the small table bolted to the wall. Coffee, bread, and something that might have been scrambled eggs. Beside it, a basin of water and a rough cloth. Thank you, Elijah said. The MP, a young private not much older than 20, hesitated. That Japanese nurse you helped, he said quietly. I heard she was tied up in the rain. That true? Elijah nodded, bleeding from where the ropes cut her wrists. The private frowned. That ain't right, enemy or not. He glanced over his shoulder, then added, Not everyone agrees with Rawlings on this, just so you know. He left before Elijah could respond, locking the cell door behind him. Elijah washed as best he could with the small basin of water, then straightened his uniform. The same one he'd worn for days now, wrinkled and stained, but the best he could manage under the circumstances. At precisely 0845, 2 MPs arrived to escort him to the hearing. They led him through corridors and upstairs to what had once been the hotel's grand ballroom. Now it served as a makeshift courtroom, with a long table at the front where 3 officers sat reviewing documents. Colonel Wilson occupied the center seat, flanked by a major and a captain Elijah didn't recognize. To one side sat Chaplain Thomas, his expression encouraging. On the other, Captain Rawlings glared, a file folder open before him. Rows of chairs faced the officers. Table. Most stood empty, but in the front row sat a familiar face that made Elijah's heart leap. Dr. Moreau, looking tired but determined. And beside him, pale but upright, sat Aiko. She wore a clean nurse's uniform with Red Cross insignia, her dark hair pulled back neatly. When their eyes met, she offered a small, brave smile that warmed him to his core. Private First Class Elijah Cole, Colonel Wilson began formally. This hearing will determine what charges, if any, should be brought against you for events occurring between November 10th and 14th, 1944. Wilson explained that this was not a court-martial, but a preliminary hearing to establish facts. Elijah would have the opportunity to speak in his own defense, and witnesses would be called to corroborate or contradict his account. Captain Rawlings, please present the charges you wish to bring, Wilson directed. Rawlings stood, ramrod straight in his pressed uniform. Colonel, Private Cole abandoned his post without authorization on November 10th, interfered with the transfer of an enemy prisoner, and later assaulted 2 military police officers during his escape from custody. I am charging him with desertion, insubordination, and assaulting military personnel, all serious offenses carrying severe penalties. Wilson nodded without expression. Private Cole, how do you respond to these charges? Elijah stood at attention. Sir, I never deserted my post. I acted as a medic when I saw someone in need of medical attention. I never assaulted any MPs, and I surrendered voluntarily as soon as I could reach someone who would hear my side. Regarding the prisoner, the Japanese nurse, what exactly happened? Wilson asked. Elijah described finding Aiko tied to the post in the rain, her wrists bleeding from the ropes. He explained how he had cut her loose to provide basic medical care, then been discovered by Lieutenant Harrington. And later, when she disappeared from custody. Here Elijah hesitated, knowing his answer could condemn him. But he had come too far for anything but the truth. I heard the MPs say they were taking her outside the walls to finish her off, sir. They were planning to execute her without trial. I couldn't let that happen. Murmurs rippled through the room. Wilson silenced them with a raised hand. Captain Rawlings, were your men authorized to execute this prisoner? Rawlings shifted uncomfortably. No, sir, but I have no evidence they planned any such thing. Private Cole is trying to justify his actions with unsubstantiated claims. We'll hear from witnesses, then, Wilson decided. Dr. Moreau, please approach. The French doctor rose and moved to stand before the officer's table. He described Aiko's condition when Elijah brought her to the clinic. Dehydrated, feverish, with infected wounds on her wrists, consistent with being bound tightly for extended periods. In your medical opinion, was Private Cole's intervention necessary? Wilson asked. Without question, Moreau replied firmly. Had the infection spread, she might have lost use of her hands. At minimum, she needed antibiotics and proper bandaging, which she had not received in American custody. Next to Elijah's surprise, the young MP named Jenkins was called. He described finding Elijah and Aiko hiding in the wheat field but choosing not to report them. Why didn't you report their location, Private? Wilson asked. Jenkins hesitated. Something didn't feel right, sir. We'd been told they were dangerous, but all I saw was a medic helping an injured woman. He glanced at Rawlings nervously. I've got a brother who's a medic in the Pacific. He always says taking care of wounded comes first, regardless of uniform. When Jenkins mentioned Elijah's escape, he carefully avoided looking at Elijah, sticking to the story they had agreed upon, that Elijah had overpowered him during a cigarette break. Finally, Aiko herself was called. She walked slowly but steadily to the front of the room, her bearing dignified despite her obvious weakness. Miss Tanaka, Wilson began, please tell us about your treatment while in American custody. Aiko's voice was soft but clear as she described being tied outdoors in the rain, denied medical attention for her injured wrists, and hearing the MPs discuss taking her outside the walls where her attempted escape would justify shooting her. Private Cole saved my life twice, she concluded. First by treating my wounds, then by preventing what would have been a murder disguised as military necessity. Rawlings surged to his feet. This is absurd. We're taking the word of an enemy combatant over American soldiers? Captain, Wilson said sharply, you'll have your turn to question the witness. Rawlings did precisely that, attempting to paint Aiko as a spy, a traitor to her own side who could not be trusted. But she remained composed, answering calmly and consistently, her dignity a stark contrast to his barely controlled anger. When all witnesses had been heard, Wilson asked Elijah if he had anything to add. Elijah stood straight, meeting the colonel's gaze directly. Sir, I took an oath as a medic to treat those in need. I also took an oath as a soldier to follow orders. In this case, those oaths came into conflict. He paused. I chose the oath that saves lives, rather than the one that would have allowed a death I could prevent. Wilson considered this, then conferred quietly with the other officers. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Elijah glanced at Aiko, drawing strength from her steady presence. Finally, Wilson addressed the room. This hearing has presented complex questions about duty, humanity, and the conduct expected of American forces during wartime. Private Cole acted against direct orders, but did so to prevent what he reasonably believed would be an unlawful killing of a prisoner of war. He turned to face Elijah directly. "Private, the charge of desertion is dismissed. You never intended to abandon your post permanently, and you surrendered voluntarily at first opportunity. The charge of assaulting military police is also dismissed based on inconsistencies in testimony." Elijah heard Rawlings inhale sharply, but Wilson continued. "However, you did disobey direct orders regarding the prisoner. For this, you will face disciplinary action. Given the circumstances, I am limiting this to reduction in rank to private and reassignment to field hospital duty away from your current command." He paused, then added more quietly, "Unofficially, Private Cole, I believe you acted with courage and humanity in a situation where both were sorely needed. The record will reflect my recommendation that once you've served 6 months in your new assignment, your previous rank should be restored." Relief washed through Elijah. Not exoneration, but fairness, more than he had dared hope for. "Captain Rawlings," Wilson continued, turning to the still fuming officer, "I am ordering an investigation into the treatment of prisoners under your supervision. The allegations made here today are serious and warrant thorough examination." Rawlings' face flushed dark with anger. "Sir, I must protest." "Protest noted and dismissed," Wilson interrupted firmly. "This hearing is concluded." As the officers rose to leave, the small audience began to disperse. Chaplain Thomas approached Elijah, hand extended. "A just outcome," the chaplain said warmly. "Your new assignment begins tomorrow, Field Hospital near Reims. I pulled some strings to make sure it's a good posting." "Thank you, sir, for everything." "No need for thanks. You did the right thing at great personal risk. That deserves support, not punishment." As Thomas moved away, Dr. Moreau approached with Iko beside him. "You are a brave man, Private Cole," Moreau said, shaking Elijah's hand. "The world needs more like you." Then he discreetly stepped aside, leaving Elijah and Iko facing each other. "You look better," Elijah said softly. "Thanks to you." Iko's dark eyes held his. "Dr. Moreau says I am officially registered as a POW under Red Cross protection. When the war ends, I will be repatriated." "That's good. You'll be able to go home." A shadow crossed her face. "Home to what?" "Japan will not welcome one branded as traitor." "Then maybe somewhere new," Elijah suggested. "Somewhere people are judged by their actions, not their uniform." "Does such a place exist?" she asked, a hint of wistfulness in her voice. "I hope so. I have to believe it does." For a moment, they stood in silence, aware of the unlikely bond forged between them through danger and compassion. "I must go," Iko finally said. "Dr. Moreau is taking me back to the clinic today." Elijah nodded. "Take care of yourself. Heal well." "And you?" She hesitated, then added softly, "I will never forget what you did, Elijah Cole. Never." As she turned to leave with Dr. Moreau, Elijah felt a strange mixture of loss and fulfillment. Their paths had crossed briefly in the chaos of war, changing both their lives irrevocably. Now, those paths diverged again, leading toward unknown futures. Yet something precious remained, the knowledge that even in the darkest times, humanity could still triumph over hatred, compassion over cruelty, and ordinary people could find extraordinary courage when it mattered most. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Dr. Moreau's clinic, casting long golden rectangles across the polished wooden floor. In the small recovery room, Iko sat upright in bed, a blanket draped across her legs despite the warmth of the day. 3 days had passed since the hearing. Her strength returned a little more each day, the infection in her wrists completely gone, leaving only faint red marks where ropes had cut into flesh. Dr. Moreau had assured her these too would fade with time, though perhaps never disappear completely. Some scars, she thought, were meant to remain, reminders of what had been endured, what had been overcome. A light knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. One of the French nurses, Marie, the younger one with kind eyes, entered carrying a tray. "Tea," she announced in careful English. "And new bandages for your wrists." Aiko thanked her, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. The tea was weak. Real tea was scarce in war-torn France, but the warmth felt good between her palms. As Marie unwrapped the old bandages, she spoke softly. "You are healing well. Dr. Moreau says perhaps tomorrow you can walk in the garden." "That would be nice." Aiko watched as the nurse applied a thin layer of ointment to her wrists before rewrapping them with clean white gauze. "Any news of Private Cole?" Marie shook her head. "Nothing since he left for his new assignment." She tied off the bandage neatly. "He was very brave, your American friend." "Yes," Aiko agreed quietly. "Very brave." After Marie left, Aiko sipped her tea slowly, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight. Her thoughts, as they often did, turned to Elijah, his quiet strength, his unwavering conviction that helping her had been the right thing, regardless of consequences. In a world torn apart by hatred and division, he had seen past uniform and race to the shared humanity beneath. How rare that was! How precious! Another knock, firmer this time. Dr. Moreau entered, carrying a clipboard and looking more cheerful than she had seen him since their arrival. "Good news," he announced. "Your official POW paperwork has been completed. The Red Cross has assigned you a registration number, which means you now have full protection under the Geneva Convention." He handed her a small card bearing her name, photograph, and identification number. Simple piece of paper, yet it represented safety, legitimacy, the right to be treated with basic dignity. "Also," Moreau continued, "I have received notice that when you are fully recovered, you will be transferred to a proper POW facility in southern France. There are other Japanese medical personnel there. You will not be alone." Aiko nodded, feeling both relief and apprehension. "When will this happen?" "Not for 2 weeks at least. You need more rest before traveling." Moreau hesitated, then added, "There is one more thing. A letter came for you today." From his pocket, he produced a folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled as if it had traveled some distance. "From Private Cole," he said, placing it on her bedside table. "I'll leave you to read it privately." After Moreau left, Aiko stared at the folded paper for several long moments. Her fingers trembled slightly as she finally reached for it. The handwriting inside was neat but rushed, as if written in stolen moments between duties. "Miss Tanaka, I hope this finds you recovering well. My new assignment at the field hospital keeps me busy. Too many wounded, too few hands to help. But the work is good, and the commanding officer here is a decent man who judges by skill, not skin color. I think often about our journey and the strange circumstances that brought us together. In a different world, without this war, we might have passed each other on a street somewhere and never known how our lives could connect. That makes me wonder about all the other connections we miss, the humanity we fail to see in strangers, because uniforms or flags or skin colors get in the way. You taught me something important, though you may not realize it. When you stayed to help that German child, knowing it would make you a traitor in the eyes of your commanders, you chose compassion over obedience. You chose to see a wounded child instead of an enemy. I hope I would have had the same courage in your place. They tell me you'll be transferred to a POW camp soon. I hope they treat you well there. And when this war finally ends, as all wars must, I hope you find your way to a place where you can be seen for who you truly are, not Japanese or enemy or traitor, but Aiko Tanaka, a nurse who could not turn away from someone who needed help. That's a kind of courage this weary world needs more of. Take care of yourself, and know that what you did and what we did together mattered. Sincerely, Elijah Cole. Aiko read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it under her pillow. Outside, church bells rang the hour, their sound carrying clearly through the open window. In the courtyard below, children played, their laughter a reminder that even in war, life continued. She closed her eyes, feeling oddly at peace despite the uncertain future. Whatever came next, the POW camp, the eventual end of the war, the return to a Japan that might not welcome her, she would face it with the same quiet determination that had sustained her so far. And she would carry with her the memory of an American medic who had seen her when no one else did, who had risked everything to defend her right to be treated as human. Some debts could never be repaid. Some gifts could only be passed forward. 2 weeks later, Elijah Cole stood at the window of the field hospital near Reims, watching the sunset behind distant hills. His shift had ended an hour ago, but he lingered, enjoying the rare moment of quiet after a day filled with the groans of wounded men and the hurried movements of medical staff. The field hospital, a collection of large tents and one partially damaged stone building, served as a way station for wounded soldiers before they were evacuated to more permanent facilities. Here, Elijah had quickly proven himself a skilled and dedicated medic, earning the respect of doctors and fellow corpsmen alike. His new commanding officer, Major Phillips, had reviewed his file on arrival, noted the circumstances of his reassignment, and simply said, "I judge my men by how they perform here, Private. The past is the past." In the 2 weeks since, Elijah had worked tirelessly, drawing on all his training and experience to save lives regardless of the uniform the wounded wore. American, British, even the occasional German prisoner, all received the same careful attention from his hands. "Cole," a voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. "Package came for you on the supply truck." Elijah turned to see Jenkins, the same young MP who had helped him escape, standing in the doorway, a small brown paper parcel in his hands. "Jenkins?" Elijah stared in surprise. "What are you doing here?" The younger man smiled sheepishly. "Got transferred after the hearing. Seems Captain Rawlings didn't appreciate my testimony." He handed over the package. "Delivering medical supplies to the front lines now. Not a bad job, all things considered." Elijah accepted the parcel, noting there was no return address, just his name written in unfamiliar handwriting. "How's the nurse?" Jenkins asked. "The Japanese lady you helped. Recovering, last I heard. They were transferring her to a POW camp in southern France." Elijah turned the package over in his hands. "Thanks for this, and for what you did that day on the road." Jenkins shrugged. "Did what seemed right, that's all." He glanced at his watch. "Better get moving. Got deliveries to make before dark." After Jenkins left, Elijah took the package to his quarters, a small corner of the stone building where a cot and footlocker marked his personal space. Sitting on the edge of his cot, he carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside lay a French Red Cross messenger's pouch, the kind used to deliver official documents between medical facilities. A folded note was pinned to the top. "Private Cole. The enclosed was given to me by Miss Tanaka before her transfer to Camp Valence yesterday. She asked that I forward it to you with her deepest gratitude and respect. Your actions, though they caused you personal difficulty, brought honor to your uniform and your profession. I count myself fortunate to have witnessed such courage in these dark times. Regards, Dr. Moreau." Elijah set aside the note and opened the pouch. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat, precise handwriting. Aiko's handwriting, he realized with a surge of emotion. "Dear Private Cole, by the time you receive this, I will have been transferred to the POW facility. Dr. Moreau assures me it is well run, with proper medical facilities where I may even be allowed to work as a nurse again. This gives me hope. I have thought often about our brief time together, the danger we faced, the kindness you showed, the quiet courage that guided your actions when orders and humanity conflicted. You saw me when no one else did. Not as enemy or foreigner or traitor, but as a person deserving of basic dignity. In a war that strips away humanity day by day, such recognition is rare beyond measure. I do not know what awaits me when this conflict finally ends. Japan may not welcome home one who was branded traitor for an act of mercy. But whatever comes, I will face it knowing that in the darkest moment of my life, I was not alone. Live free after this war, Elijah Cole. Build something good in the peace that follows. That will save me again, in ways you may never fully understand. With deepest gratitude, Aiko Tanaka. Elijah read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in his breast pocket, close to his heart. Outside, the last light of day faded from the sky, giving way to the deep blue of early evening. Somewhere beyond the horizon, artillery flashed, the war continuing its grim business. But here, in this moment, a quiet victory had been acknowledged. Not the kind that would appear in history books or earn medals, but the kind that mattered most. A victory of compassion over cruelty, of shared humanity over arbitrary division. Elijah stepped outside into the cool evening air. Above him, stars began to appear. The same stars that shone over Aiko in her POW camp. Over the battlefields where men still fought and died. Over the distant homes where loved ones waited for war's end. The future remained uncertain. For him, for Aiko, for a world torn apart by conflict. But he carried with him now a certainty that transcended war's chaos. Some connections, once forged, could not be broken by distance or circumstance. Some acts of courage rippled outward, touching lives in ways that could never be measured or predicted. Aiko's letter rested against his heart as he walked toward the mess tent for evening meal. Whatever came next, whatever battles lay ahead, whatever peace might follow, he would move forward, carrying the quiet knowledge that when it had mattered most, he had chosen mercy. And in this war of unimaginable cruelty, that choice had made all the difference. The end.